every one of your listeners thinks that Nae'Blis condones slavery and stabbing.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Today we're here with Nae'Blis from YouTube, and I just want to say hi and thank you so much for coming on and be willing to talk about this chapter with us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So usually what I ask my guests is just sort of, how did you find Wheel of Time in your life? And then, tell me a little bit about your YouTube channel and what got you into producing content for the Wheel of Time community.
So Wheel of Time wise, it's kind of funny. What was I? I was a freshman in college. I was back home from break and I was kind of bored and I was looking for a book to read. My dad had a book or a box, like a cardboard box full of just books that he had picked up secondhand somewhere sitting in the basement. And I don't think it had been opened in a while. So I was just started going through his books to see if there was anything interesting in there. And there was a copy of Eye of the World in it that I think he had not read ever and had been sitting in that box for like 10 years or something. I mean, this is in maybe it was probably 2000, I think it was. Because I don't think Winter's Heart was quite out yet. So anyways, I picked it up. I thought, oh, that cover looks weird, but I'll read it. Loved the first book. Ended up finding out as I was reading it, because the copy that he had said that there was only one other book. It said there was only The Great Hunt because it was that old of a copy. So I thought, there may not be many of these. And as I picked up Great Hunt, it said the copy that I got of Great Hunt had, there's like 7 more of them. Oh, cool. So I kept reading them. I caught all the way up. And then right as I caught up, I binged them pretty fast. Winter's Heart came out. And I went and picked that up at Barnes & Noble. I remember that. And then basically that was about the point the online community was getting kicked off. So I was a big Wattmania person. Gotcha. I followed on Wattmania a lot. I was a little bit on Theoryland, that kind of thing. But in any case, I read the books. I was pretty devastated that Robert Jordan died. Thrilled that Sanderson was going to finish the books. And, long and short of it, for years and years and years after the books were finished, I just kept hoping, I hope they make a show out of this. I hope they make a movie out of it. And so I would periodically get on and I would Google Wheel of Time, like anything going on, just trying to figure out, because I hadn't read the books in a while. And I just thought, I wonder if they're going to make anything about this. I saw the horrible
Winter Dragon.
And I thought, they're never going to do this now. Wow.
That's the nail in the coffin. That's it.
That was my thought too. We're fucked.
Never going to do it. Yep. But, long and short of it, I remember the article that got me interested in doing YouTube. So I Googled, it was right when it came out that Harriet basically said to everybody, hey, we have something figured out with the rights. We're going to be going into production with a major studio. And then that was kind of all they said. And then I was like, oh, shoot, I'm excited. And at that point, I was kind of into YouTube. I was just, watching YouTube stuff. And I thought, I bet people are talking about this. And so I popped on YouTube, Wheel of Time, nada. The only thing that came up was a few videos that Daniel Green had made that were actually a college report of his that talked about just recapping the books. That was the only thing I could find. And then the Winter Dragon thing. I'd always wanted to make a YouTube channel. So I thought, well, what the heck? I'll make a few videos, see what happens. And when I made them, it was like, it must have struck a nerve because everybody was like, my channel blew up pretty quick. Because at that point, I was pretty much the only game in town, me and Daniel. And then that's kind of the rest is history. And that's where we're at now. And now I'm podcasting too, with Tarval and After Dark. So it's kind of crazy how this has all gone. And
it's funny how similar your story it feels to me to what happened in the podcast space, where I was a big podcaster looking for podcasts, and other than a couple of Legendarian episodes, and Twacast, which was kind of done at that point. There wasn't really anything else out there, so I started it off, and it blew up pretty fast, and here we are. So I was like, if you replace YouTube for podcasting in that story, it feels very similar to me, familiar to me.
And now you're doing Tarval and After Dark, you're podcasting, and we're considering how do we go into YouTube? What does that look like?
Videos, yeah, absolutely.
How are we going to cross?
Exactly. I would love to talk about Chapter 7, Pitfalls and Tripwires, and our symbol is the Lion of Andor.
Because that's where the pitfalls and tripwires are. Really, I mean, they're everywhere, but specifically with respect to Andoran politics in this chapter.
Well, and it's a quote by LTT in this chapter. Rand felt the dragon scepter in his hand, felt every line of the carved dragons against his heron-branded palm, as clearly as if he was running his fingers over them. Yet it seemed someone else's hand. If a blade cut it off, he would feel the pain, and keep going. It would be another's pain. He floated in the void, surrounded by emptiness beyond knowing, and Saidin filled him, trying to grind him to dust beneath steel-shattered cold and heat, where stone would flash to flame, carry the Dark One's taint on its flow, forcing corruption into his bones, into his soul, he feared sometimes. It did not make him feel so sick to his stomach as it once had. He feared that even more. And larded through that torrent of fire, ice, and filth, life. That was the best word. Saidin tried to destroy him. Saidin filled him to overflowing with vitality. It threatened to bury him, and it enticed him. The war for survival, the struggle to avoid being consumed, magnified the joy of pure life. So sweet even with the foulness. What would it be like clean, beyond imagining? He wanted to draw more, draw all there was. There lay the deadly seduction. One slip in the ability to channel would be seared out of him forever. One slip and his mind was gone. If he was not simply destroyed on the spot. And maybe everything around him, too. It was not madness focusing on the fight for existence. It was like high-walking blindfolded over a pit full of sharpened stakes, basking in so pure a sense of life that thinking of giving it up was like thinking of a world forever in shades of gray. Not madness. It's always fun reading Rand's little thoughts like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's. I mean, not that this has anything depth to go on there. It's RJ's writing style.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the description of it. I think this is where you can always tell Robert Jordan writing as opposed to other people's.
Yeah.
Is the way that he describes stuff like this, and the way that Rand feels it. And again, you're also getting it through Rand's perspective. Right. I mean, the other thing that Robert Jordan is, I would say, is widely considered to be the master of, or a master of, is unreliable narrators.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be frank, the first couple times I read the books, I didn't think Rand was crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I actually thought it all made sense to me. Like, Rand, everything
Totally
he was
justified.
doing made sense. And the people around him just didn't know what they were talking about.
Probably until I read Memory of Light, I would say. The first time.
And then I went back and now it's like you read it and I'm like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on your podcast, but he's batshit crazy.
Oh, motherfucking batshit crazy, yeah.
He is, yes. Like, because, yeah, he's batshit, and you're starting to see that a little bit here.
Yeah,
I think.
for sure. And LTT is coming up so much in this chapter. Like, he's right there at the surface.
Putting this on it within the timeline, we are just post Dumai's Wells, and he's about to take out Kalendor in the very near future and roast a bunch of his own troops. So we're sort of between some pretty dark spots.
Yep.
You know, that's like, there's some Attack on Ilion as well, but yeah, this is Rand at his lowest, as far as I can tell. And at his closest to being insane.
Yeah, he's very much in his nadir.
One thing, and I don't know, again, I know it seems like it's kind of mincing, but in the very first paragraph, he talks about someone could cut my hand off and I would
just keep going.
It would feel like it's some right, and I would just keep going. That's obvious foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's so obvious. So I was like, my brain was like, foreshadowing. Skip it. Everyone's gonna see that. Don't even bring it up. But like, it's just so obvious. Yeah.
Well, if it was a different writer, I would play that off as coincidence.
But not with Robert.
Knowing how Robert Jordan sets up the foreshadowing in his books, it's not a coincidence.
Absolutely not.
It's on purpose.
Absolutely not. And same with when it's what would it be like clean? That's letting you know that the cleansing is coming soon. Like, again, without a doubt.
Almost everything I highlighted in this paragraph was foreshadowing. Like that's so much foreshadow. I'm realizing that like this is just a 3-paragraph like Rand thinking to himself like, God, that could never happen. 5 minutes later,
Taviran
thing happened. Yeah. I did notice he's not feeling so sick to his stomach with the Saidin. I think that's because he's becoming. I mean, he's tainted now, right? So it's just like
it's like he's built up a bit of a tolerance at this point.
Yeah.
Like,
which also scares
which
him.
is fair. Like, this often, the descriptions of this make me think of like certain drug experiences that are terrifying and exhilarating. And like you build up a tolerance, right? The first time is never repeated, ever. Doesn't matter what the substance is, the first time is different. And like, you know, it's not quite the same with the power, because it's always intense and amazing because it's like actual life. But, you know, we've talked before on the podcast about how much channeling is like drug use and how much there's like components that parallel that. So it's, not only is there the power itself, there's the taint. And that is just a shitty drug that doesn't do anything fun for you at all.
Alcoholism, for some reason, came to mind as I was reading this paragraph. This, like, not making you sick to your stomach anymore, just, like, building up a tolerance, like, just, and then, like, affecting your liver over time, and, like, realizing that that's actually damaging you.
Mm-hmm. And he's very correct to be worried about it. It's a good read on himself, which is unusual for him.
But he's constantly dodging the idea that he might already be insane, or that LTT is the insane part of his brain, like talking to him. And that, like,
that's exactly it, though, right? That's exactly it. It is LTT. And that's the way I read it. I just thought, well, Luz Theron's crazy, Rand's not.
And the answer is there is no difference, right? What's the difference between these two people? They're the same person, right? So the fact that
they never were different.
Yeah, they are the same picture, right? And so a lot of LTT's craziness are Rand's extreme emotions, Rand's craziness, Rand's ranting. All of that is Rand going nuts and sequestering it in part of his brain, fighting off the insanity. And we see that especially when we get to Brandon, we see that from a lot of different Ashraman's point of view, is how they fight the insanity, how they're able to be like, no, I know those shadows aren't there.
Yeah.
I can fight off that insanity. I can use the rational part of my brain until they can't.
Well, and it is terrifying because it does make you feel like, what would it actually feel like to be schizophrenic?
Yeah.
Right. To see people that aren't there and have them talk to you, and like how strange that would be. And this is actually one of the things I'm really excited for them to address in the show. So I love these descriptions in the books.
Yeah. And you see he's dissociating so strongly, right? He's not connected to his body. He's not connected to his emotions because he's binning them all into LTT. Like, he's dissociating so strongly that there's this whole weird plot arc with Moradin where he literally gets a new body. Like, that's how hard he freaking dissociates. He literally gets a whole new body.
You're right. This is a really important thing for the TV show because, I mean, in the books, Rand is our main character. Can anyone argue Rand's not the main character of the books? Like, he is. You know, like, and this is his central story arc and his central journey. So, like,
this is central to where the Chosen One arc, how RJ separates it, because the Wheel of Time does have a Chosen One. In fact, it has multiple Chosen One. But in this case, where this is a very flawed Chosen One, like, Rand is one of the least likable characters in the series.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for your main character to be somebody that most people universally don't really like that much, right? That's interesting. Because otherwise he is a Mary Sue. He's a Taviran. He has plot armor that's built into the book. He's all powerful. He seems to be able to beat Forsaken that should be able to trounce him,
Sure.
right? Like, all of these things. But where he separates and where RJ separates here is how flawed Rand is. Whether it's the built-in toxic masculinity that he has from Two Rivers crap, and, you know, the way that he can't harm women, and like you have all these different character flaws in Rand that get magnified over the course of the series until finally he's actually objectively a horrible leader.
Very.
Like, a horrible leader. Like, that's what I do for my day job, is I do business and leadership development coaching. He checks all of the wrong boxes on good leadership, but yet he's the leader of everything, right? But all of that kind of comes to a head, and it's just saying how flawed he is, but his arc is so good. I think Rand is one of the best written characters in fantasy literature. Not because I like Rand, but because I feel like his arc is so believable. Can you imagine handing somebody that's 18, 19 years old all of that power, telling them then you're going to have to save the world and die in the process, right? And then also, by the way, you have this taint that makes you crazy. Now deal with it.
And the stress we've talked about, the lack of sleep we've talked about.
And not everyone's going to rally behind you. This is not going to be a great universal existential threat that gets you the support of the nations. You're going to have to juggle politics for however many months until your appointed demise.
which he was not trained to do, had no understanding of it. That's why I think Rand is such a good character to read. And this is why I love scenes like this. Now, the other reason you could argue Rand is one of the best developed characters is because we get so much development of Rand, because we get more chapters with
more POV. Sure, that's part of it. Yeah, but it's the layering. It's the layering of reasons. You know, it's one of the things he does in Ebu Dar when Rand's like trying to figure out like all the weirdness around the power, and you're like, wait, what's going on? And it's like, well, there's the Bowl of the Winds was used that overtaxed it, and that's what's going on. But also he's going insane. But also there's that weirdness with the crossing of the streams that he can't like hold on to his things, but also, and you're like, there's all these effects going on, and you're trying to figure out like what's causing what, and it allows him to write a very complex story with some very simple elements by layering them on top of each other. And I feel like that's what he's doing with the madness as well. That with Rand, you've got the taint, you've got the stress, you've got the inexperience, you've got the culture shock, you've got the toxic masculinity, and you put all those on top of each other. And an incredible sex drive. Jesus Christ, man. You know, like, that's half of what he's thinking about all the time is the women in his life. So, like, put that all together, and most authors, that'd be a morass of unrelated sentences. Jordan weaves it together into this tapestry of course that's what he's thinking. That's, you know, that's how brains work. And it gets darker and darker and darker. And he can change one aspect of those at the time, and the layers show it, and it's just this, you know, and it happens so gradually that you look up and you're like, I love Rand. Balefires the city. Oh, poor guy. You know, and you're like,
yeah,
wait a minute.
This is my emotional support war criminal. Thank you very much.
Is it bad when I read that I legit thought that Rand was right in doing it?
Yeah.
When I read it.
I'm still not entirely sure he wasn't pragmatic in doing it.
Maybe not Balefire,
yeah,
right? But then again, he wouldn't have known Grendel was dead without in his own head, without the Balefire.
But of course, the whole point is it didn't work in the first place, so
no,
there was no point to it anyway, because he thought Grendel was dead, and he fooled himself.
Yeah. It's rough to be the savior of the world, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
No, and again, I just listened to the thing where he Balefire the Shan Chan, and just the beat, right? Like, both sides are badly defeated, and the Dark One's going, yay! Like, it's an exact, you know, it's why the Dark One set up Do My Wells. Man, there's just so much in his head here.
Questions. So we've got him wondering about the Kyrianan, the Aes Sedai, wondering about Fael and Dira's loyalty. Why is Perrin being such a butt?
And Perrin doesn't understand that Rand's gone through this whole thing about, like, I can't trust Aes Sedai anymore. And he's like, they're just women. What are you doing?
Yeah, Rand is not getting where Perrin's coming from.
I don't get where Perrin's coming from. I actually, to me, I hate this part from Perrin.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's in his arc, I suppose, or in his character, I suppose, but it's such the toxic masculinity, Emmons Field crap.
Yeah.
How dare these? I mean, they just literally kidnapped and tried to, beat him and almost had him killed. And Perrin's like, how can you tell them what to do?
Yeah.
When he does it himself, by the way, and he snaps at Varen and Alana, and it didn't, honestly, it either was trying to make Perrin a stupid character, in my opinion, which I think to a degree Perrin is sometimes. Perrin is also objectively a bad leader, by the way. Egwene is by far the best in the series, but that's a separate topic. Out of the context of this, but but that drove me nuts, because it's not that I'm advocating slavery for the Aes Sedai in the way that Rand is kind of doing it, but on the flip side of that, like, I mean, they kidnapped him and tried to lock him up and beat him every day and put him in a box.
Yeah.
And he wants to let the wise ones take charge of them. You know they're going to be nicer than the Aes Sedai were to him.
Right. And I don't understand why Perrin would be upset by that, because especially considering Perrin doesn't have this great respect for Aes Sedai. Like, where is that all of a sudden coming from?
That's what I never have gotten.
He's always been the most respectful. Like, he's certainly more respectful than Rand or
fair.
Matt.
He's pretty nasty to Moraine in Dragon Reborn.
That is true. He does stand up for himself, yeah. But, you know, as a chronic Perrin defender, I think he's more worried about Rand going over the deep end and doing something he regrets than necessarily worried about the welfare of the women themselves. He's like, these are helpless women, they're prisoners. You can't abuse them. You can't,
They're so helpless.
They're so helpless. Well, but Perrin makes the point as in a way they are more helpless than regular people while they are shielded because they've come to depend on the power for so much, and so he sees them as even more helpless than normal women, and so he really does think that like they need to be defended, and like and he's talking from a point of don't torture and kill your prisoners, right? Like that seems let's follow the what's the Geneva Convention? I don't know, we don't have Geneva here, but like let's at least not torture and kill people, treat them humanely. Some of the things the wise ones do to their prisoners is not considered that humane. Running till you drop is not something we are allowed to do to prisoners.
What I don't think makes sense about this is that Perrin is willing to throw so much away on the issue. I can see being upset. I can see wanting Rand to not hurt himself. I don't see risking his life over these women. Like that, it's just too far. Like, Perrin, why? Why would you put so much loyalty on enemies? Yeah, sure, you want Rand to retain his humanity, but like, at some point, you have to let the man do his thing and go back to, like, I don't know, staying alive to play your part in taking care of the Two Rivers, who you actually care about.
The only thing I think is maybe projecting some other issues onto that issue and making, it's how sometimes arguments aren't necessarily about what the argument's about.
Maybe.
Well, here's another discussion. Again, this is not canon, but you can kind of read into this a little bit. Because first of all, there's two things going on here. This is the beginning of Rand being kind of crazy. Like, he no longer trusts anybody. He's even questioning Perrin, right? You're also getting this story of how Perrin fought with him through his eyes. Like, we know Perrin was upset about it, but we don't know to the extent that Perrin was upset about it later, right? Because we're hearing about this from Rand's point of view after the fact. And I'm just saying Rand's craziness can kind of skew the story. I'm just throwing it out there because I do think, again, Robert Jordan does this deliberately, where he does give us unreliable thought process, like,
and Rand should be the most unreliable of them all.
Mm-hmm. He's crazy.
Yeah, because he's nuts. Yeah.
He's nuts.
He's nuts. Speaking of which, they must be done away with. You must do it. Don't you remember the last time that place by the wells was a pittance? Cities burned whole out of the earth were nothing. We destroyed the world. Do you hear me? They have to be killed. Wiped from the
Yeah. LTT is...
So, little LTT ranting.
He's really close.
That thing by the wells.
Yeah.
Nothing.
We destroyed the world.
He's kind of right about that.
He's very right about that.
He is.
At this point, LTT kind of starts being more right. Like, in the beginning, he was just ranting and raving and wrong about a bunch of shit. Now he's, like, kind of making more sense than he really should. And Rand starts to make less sense. And
they start talking. Rand starts to feel conflicted about losing LTT, if that were to happen.
Yeah, he's like, oh, my friend, my buddy. There's a couple of times here where he's like, I wish he'd shut up, but then I'd be alone.
Yeah.
All alone, with Alana in my head.
Who is he? I mean, is he talking about... I'm just kind of rereading this in my head, because usually when LTT goes off on these crazy kill them all, it's about the Ashaman, right?
Yeah.
This feels like it's about the Aes Sedai, if I'm reading it right.
Yeah.
There is a point later where he brings up that the Ashaman are with him, and that's who Lewis Theron is ranting about. So it's not the Ashaman, but the dedicated and the soldiers.
Okay, because I was going to say, if he's talking about the Aes Sedai, that's a little strange, but the other side of this, that's also, I suppose, maybe I'm reading into this a little too much, but isn't that what you do here?
Yep.
He says, cities burned out of the earth were nothing, we destroyed the world. Lewis Theron was dead before the breaking.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. That's Rand's interpretation.
Is this Rand coming through? Or is Lewis Theron talking about the War of Power?
Well...
Right. That could be the alternative to that, is that he's talking about the War of Power, right? But I was just thinking in my head, I'm like, well, as you read this, Lewis Theron was dead.
Cities were burned out of the earth by the Balefire
during the war.
During the War of Power, before the breaking. And then they
the greatest acts of men and women,
Right.
Right. So maybe, I don't know, just reading into it.
It could be both, though, because, like, we know that when men and women work together, it's much more powerful. So LTT, if he does exist, does know that the biggest, baddest weapons would be the result of collaboration. But I think it's more likely that, it's Rand's fear of going mad, right? Being like, how the breaking happened. That's part of global lore.
That is an interesting, because then, I mean, obviously right after this, he goes on to this, man, I'm crazy. This is Rand in his own head. He's going, I'm crazy. I'm hearing people in my head that's been dead.
Nobody else had voices in their head except Madman. And he's like thinking, no one has voices in their head except Madman, but I'm not mad. Just this voice in my head is. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how often do I have to say, I'm not crazy, it's just the voices in my head are?
Well, you flip in the very next paragraph. What about me, Rand thought?
Yeah.
What about you? How are we different from them? Talking about the madmen.
Yeah, he's arguing with the voice in his head. It's like, yeah, how are you different, Rand?
No, he's not. And that's the difference is he has actual real memories.
Right, like the climbing of the plum trees or whatever. Like, that's an actual memory.
The weaves, the memories of the Forsaken, all of that information, that is what makes him the Dragon Reborn. Is the taint is doing two things to him. It's both driving him insane, but it's also giving him very real memories of his life as LTT.
So I guess, yeah, the taint does give him something, because it thins the barrier between his lives, because the Dark One is a corrosive, unraveling force.
Taint. Sorry, I can't help it. I'm a child.
So, about these Ashaman, Jonan Adley, Eben Hopwell, and Fedwin Moore. So much sadness. I actually forget what happens to Adley, but Hopwell gets killed in the cleansing, and Moore dies to wine.
Adley, I believe, dies in the Shanchanachak. Rand kills him.
I knew the name made me feel sad, but I couldn't remember why.
Again, I was just listening to that this morning, so yes, I probably 3 hours ago listened to Adley get struck down by lightning and have half his body burnt, and Rand
And
freak
that's
out about it.
before the cleansing? Okay, yeah. So I was going to say, this is reverse order of when they should have, but no, this is actually out of order.
It's a full book before.
Podcasting's helping me fix the events to certain covers, for sure, because I'm physically holding the book for so many hours.
I just think about when he conquers what nations and when he does what. That it's all kind of coming together. Because Dumais Wells is a good point in the middle of that, but then, okay, and then we have the prolonged taking over of Ilion, which happens finally at the end of this book, but it seems like it's that in the rescuing Fael storyline that should have happened in one book that took three. Because, like, he's talking about capturing Ilion in the last book.
Yeah, you think it's going to be the final battle in
Lord of Chaos.
Book 6
Yeah.
in Lord of Chaos, and it's not. It ends up being the final battle in Book 7, and so it feels like, wait a minute, we're doing this all over again. But, like, because of Dumais Wells, he was interrupted, and so he had to write a whole nother book to get to that final battle.
Right. And it feels like Rand is setting up this giant, ooh, I gotcha surprise thing that kind of amounts to nothing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, and he says, you know, part of what happens is Fane interrupts him again.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like the attack on Alien is like gets started and then stops, and then gets started and then stops. And then finally on his third attempt, when he's just like, fuck it, I know I just got stabbed, I know I can't barely get out of bed, but no one's going to expect I attack now, that's when it finally happens, you know?
But then it isn't even that much of a surprise because, like, Samael's waiting for it and then has a plan. And, like, it didn't feel like this master stroke from Rand. It felt kind of like you thought you were planning a master stroke, but we saw through it the whole time.
No, and the only thing that saved him is a moment of inattention in Mashadar.
Which is just so...
And the fact that Moradin helped. Because he would have been dead if Moradin hadn't helped him.
Yeah.
The importantness of all of that, not Ishamael, not the battle, not the city, it's the crossing of the streams.
Yeah.
I love that we're calling it the crossing of the streams.
That's what else do you call it?
Don't ever cross the stream.
Don't ever cross the streams.
Because
right?
then this will happen, apparently.
Right, you know. You take true power Balefire and one power Balefire, and you cross them, and bad stuff happens.
But is it really bad? Because it leads to Rand, like, surviving the last battle.
It also leads to Rand understanding how to win the last battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, paradoxes.
Yeah. But if we continue on this page, there's more sadness. There's Anila and Samara. Anila and her flaxen-haired friend Samara. They make him horrible soup, and then he's very sad about when they die, but then more soup gets made, and he's a little frustrated about it.
Their bad soup doesn't die with them.
Yeah, it's like, you know what? If they were gonna die, could they have taken the soup recipe with them to the grave? That would have been helpful. So yeah, it's just a page of sadness, basically.
But again, we are coming back to Kimlin for the first time, and so I think what we're getting here is Jordan saying, here's where all these characters are, here's the characters he's hanging out with, let me reintroduce them to you really quick so you remember who they are, ha ha ha. But this is sort of Robert Jordan listing off everyone who's in the room.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of names in this chapter overall. I only highlighted some of them because...
Right, I skipped over a bunch, because, like, we've either talked about them before, or they're not important until later, or something like that, yeah.
So, He owes the maidens whatever they want, except for personal agency. Apparently, he can't give them that. I find that very funny. He's like, they die for me. I owe them whatever they want. It's like, you know what they want? Is for you to not beat yourself up about them dying for you. Maybe you could try that.
He's not going to learn that lesson until the last battle when Egwene shoves it in his face as she's dead.
Yeah. Her last dying message is like, Rand, stop being an idiot.
Which is like kind of sad. It kind of reminds me of her accepted test. It's all about Rand. Let's just have Egwene be all about helping Rand get through his shit.
What do you think Rand saying, I don't intend to spend all night here while you lot play Kiss the Daisies? Is that even a game, or did he just totally get, like, Maiden's Kiss wrong? Yeah.
No, I always assumed it was like the putting buttercups under your chin or some bullshit children's game like that. I assumed it was some Two Rivers children's game, basically. But I've never heard of anything like that.
I kind of assumed it was Rand misinterpreting Maiden's Kiss. And, like, not remembering the name of it and saying it like Kiss the Daisies is a game you guys play. Because he's never actually seen anyone play Maiden's Kiss. And he thought it was just, like, a fun game.
It doesn't come up anywhere else. So this is the only reference.
Yeah, so... I think he's saying, I'm not going to stay here and play patty cake with you. I have shit to do. What are his 3 destinations? Why do I not remember what his 3 destinations are?
Well, Caemlyn's the one.
But I feel like he just does Caemlyn. Is that all he does?
Oh, that's the only thing...
It's the only one he does in this chapter.
And we didn't do our proper amount of research and look ahead.
Okay, so he's only doing the 1 destination tonight. Cool. We will return to that when we get to him going to the other destinations, I guess.
He ends up going to Tyr to leave the Asha'man there, and Ruidian to retrieve the control statue Terangrial.
Luce Theron is continuing to pace around and be angry, and then Rand is angry. They're yelling at each other in their head. And Rand's like, oh, I never yelled at Luce Theron that significantly before. I wonder if I hurt his feelings.
I don't want him to go away. He's my only friend. Yeah, no, it's not great.
Do you hear me, Kinslayer? They go through a stable into the royal palace of Andor.
I believe this is the last, other than when he impregnates Elaine. I think this is the last time that he's there.
He tries to stay away from Caemlyn as a rule, yeah.
Which everyone's happy about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I did want to point out slightly before that, Fedwin has a Wilder block, which Taim calls a bar, which is very much a Forsaken term that we assume he gets from Demandred, either directly or indirectly.
Or from being Demandred.
I was saying directly or indirectly, however you want to say that, whether you are subscribed to the Demandred theory or not. At that point, he gets all his terminology from a Forsaken either way.
Yep. Because
he was either trained by one or is one.
Okay, let's back up. How stupid is Rand?
Pretty fucking stupid.
I mean, how stupid are you? First of all, how many channelers would Taim have trained that he would have a term for that? It's just a bar.
Happens all the time. It's just what it is.
It's a bar, Like, how many Wilders have been trained by Taim that he has a term for that he refers to it so casually? Now, I suppose he could have made it up, but it doesn't sound like something he would know about. It's just like, how stupid are you, Rand?
He's going crazy.
How do you not see this?
I've been saying that about Dashiva. Dashiva's the only one who knows blue lightning fire. Everyone else uses red fire. How did he learn that? Not from, he must have known that. He must not be, there's a whole thing with
Azula taught him.
Yeah, exactly. Matt tried to catch the lightning, but it went wrong that one time, so they redirected it. Yeah, Avatar, man. It's great. And not to mention the whole Avatar Wheel of Time 4 powers or 5 powers sort of intermixing. It's just, there's obvious parallels between the two shows.
That and Captain Planet. That show is incredibly bad if you ever go back and watch it.
It is? Oh, that's disappointing.
Have you ever seen the Don Cheadle Funny or Die skit where he plays Captain? Okay, you get off of here. You guys need to pull up YouTube and type in Don Cheadle Captain Planet.
Okay.
You will lose it's funny as hell. So.
The concept of those elements is also found in every single earth worshipping religion ever.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of the 5 elements is slightly broad. Not universal, but pretty gosh darn broad.
Another reason why you gotta love...
I'm autofilling so many things right now. I don't want to say any of them.
Bruce Willis sci-fi movie, Fifth Element. Thank you.
Yes. Fifth Element, one of my favorite movies of all time.
It's a great movie.
I don't know why I don't have the tattoo yet. I really don't.
There's something about the five powers that really like creates a compelling story. I'm telling you, Wheel of Time.
My mom's even given me a survival mnemonic that goes with the five powers, because you need them in staggered out things at a time, right? You need to breathe. You can only go for like 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, however long without shelter, depending. And then eventually you need your spirit to get fulfilled. Eventually you're going to need entertainment, storytelling, companionship. It's literally what you need to survive.
It's sort of like the pyramids of needs, right?
Yeah.
That like they expand out like every
Maslow's hierarchy of
intervals.
needs, which is not a great concept, and it's really flawed, and it's partially stolen from I forget which Native American tribe, the Iroquois. The Iroquois. He was riffing off of some Iroquois stuff and then fucked it up. But nonetheless, yes, that concept.
Are you saying the food pyramid is also not a legitimate way of deciding what to eat?
That is a whole separate podcast right there.
10 servings of carbs a day isn't good for me? What? No.
We really should start a podcast where we just bitch about shit.
Brought to you by the same people that say that marijuana is a gateway drug, right?
What state are you in?
Not one where it's legal.
Aw,
Gotcha.
that's a bummer.
Yeah, we're in Oregon, so it is, which has been nice.
I'm in Ohio, so
Yeah.
wonderful Ohio.
Ohio. I think that's the state no, not the first state I got high in, but it was one of the first states I got high in on a road trip.
Kansas would have been one of mine. Yeah.
Kansas is the most boring state I've ever been to in my life.
Yes.
Flatter than a pancake, topographically speaking.
Yes.
The ratios.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't like Mount Everest flatter than a pancake?
The Earth is smoother than a bowling ball, than a cue ball. But same thing. Yeah, all the way from the bottom of the Marianas Trench up to the peak of Mount Everest is like less pits and divots than a cue ball. So
Earth is a big place.
It's
yeah,
really big, really big,
and really smooth. I am at the step through to Camelin, and then there's a bit of a gap where I don't have a whole lot. He's thinking a bit about Alana.
Mm-hmm.
I see a bit more of the flashes of color when he thinks about Perrin and Matt. I saw another reference to that at the bottom of a paragraph. There's a bit of this sort of joking between the Ashaman and the Maidens, where the Maidens are kind of making fun of the Ashaman, and the Ashaman are like getting all flustered, and Rand's like,
getting all
stand down, boys. They're just making fun of you. Yeah, they're getting all butthurt.
It's like, this is high school, guys. Grow up.
Right, grow up. Like, this is they're just making fun of you. You can deal with it. But I kind of like the idea that the maids are almost testing them to see if they're mad.
Yeah, and like the whole there's a little element of danger, which makes it more fun. It's just like, man, this is one of those things where I wish I could have a little bit of that Aiel like chutzpah, like they just don't ever quit.
It kind of reminds me of like throwing knives at poisonous lizards that'll bite you in the desert, right? Like it's the same kind of game of like poke the lizard, try not to get bit. It's a fun game. You probably won't die, but you could.
Mm-hmm. Or jumping off of cliffs into the ocean, and if you hit wrong, you might not get your breath back in time. Like, it's a little fun when you might die.
It's a little fun when you might die, and
you probably won't die. And I mean, as someone who has gone skydiving, that was a different adrenaline rush than taking my bike down a hill. It's really, really fun and amazing. But yeah, when you actually could die, it feels different.
Yeah. No, and I think there's a something in the maidens that live for that, right? Because they fight.
Oh, yeah. The Aiel cultivate that, and then the maidens cultivate that.
Yeah, the maidens are definitely a subset culture of the Aiel. I think they're a little nuts, but I love them. Like, they're my favorite Aiel.
Totally.
Then again, I have some differing opinions. This might be a definite sidetrack on the Aiel in general, though. I'm not a fan of spankings and all that kind of stuff that goes on, and
corporal punishment is the only punishment.
Beatings and is the only way to treat. Like people, I think sometimes equate the Aiel with being this super honorable, super wise culture. Yet this same super wise culture keeps calling Kyrianan people tree killers when it was literally their king that did it, right? And for some reason they can't stop hating an entire group of people because of something that you get what I mean? Like it would
totally.
Yeah.
It would be sort of like them saying all Aiel are bad because Couladin was an idiot.
Right. Yeah, no, they have a lot of admirable qualities, but they are not inherently superior to any other culture.
No, and I don't think that at all. In fact, in a lot of ways, they're very backwards. But I think in it's RJ's own way of trying to write strength in women, the way he writes Wise Ones and Soralia, and there's a debatable topic there. Yeah, in general though, I love the maidens. I love that they are probably the most dangerous Aiel, and they're women. It's one of the areas where I feel like maybe RJ did succeed a little bit in flipping gender roles well.
They do feel like a troop of young male warriors, sort of like, how many times have I met soldiers who did some dumb, dangerous stuff while they were, overseas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're like, well, it's just what we were doing. I'm like, oh my God, you would never do that today. And they're like, we're in so much danger. That little bit of extra danger doesn't feel crazy to us, and like, and the constant joking around and joshing each other, and they do it a lot with hand talk rather than with verbal words. But we see that where they're constantly trying to embarrass each other because yes, they're warriors and dangerous. They're also teenagers,
and they have an identity though too. I mean, they very much have an identity as a group of people, as a subset culture of the Aiel in general, and they identify with being maidens more than anything, which is why it's so difficult for them to quote unquote give up the spear.
And there's a fair amount of hazing that goes into that. We don't talk. That's when we talk about the spanking and that sort of thing. Like beatings and all that.
Camp and
that's hazing. That's what a lot of that. Like we talk about on college campuses, people die from hazing all the time, right? You can't imagine that like a lot of these maidens don't die from this sort of thing.
Well, somehow it's honorable though to
somehow honorable.
Hey, I lied, so you women get to beat the shit out of me until you feel like you're done.
And that is one way, right? The other thing that Egwene says is that is the fastest way to get rid of your honor. There are other ways to resume your honor. But yeah.
Fair enough. It's like, I don't find that to be an admirable quality. Let's just put it that way.
I don't think
we could do a whole episode about this.
Yes,
just
I'm
tearing
sure we
apart the Aiel's punishment schemes. Yes.
Corporal punishment has never ever been proven to ever improve anything. It's just punishment. They bind him up and they're sneaking him in as a prisoner, blindfolded, and the blindfold freaks him out because it feels like he doesn't like being in the darkness.
Yeah, it's a trigger for his PTSD.
I love the comment on Sulin's long-bladed knife that's like a foot or more of steel, and it's like, I know Aiel aren't supposed to use swords, but that's a short sword.
Yeah, not that you would say that to her, but
the difference between a very long knife and a very short sword is not that much.
Academic.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think Sulin is very much pushing the edge of what could be called, and I think a lot of the warriors are. Like, I think the not using a sword is almost a thing in name only at this point, And we've seen that. We've seen that change in the culture, and we see in Avia and his visions that it's entirely possible that they lose all respect for not using a sword.
Right.
They forget why, but
I mean, that in that vision, it's just that they're so desperate any weapon will do.
Yeah. At this point, I think it's more of a slow evolution, right? Each generation of weaponsmiths is like, oh, well, if I can engineer it a little better. Over time, they're lengthening towards sword-like proportions, but at the same time, the spear is really efficient.
I think they say their purpose is to use a weapon that isn't exclusively a weapon.
Correct.
That's the idea, and that a sword is only a sword.
It can't be anything else. Yeah.
A dagger, though, can be used to cut stuff and...
Yeah, it's Perrin's essential struggle with the hammer or the axe, is like the hammer can be used to create also.
And the only reason the Aiel don't use an axe is there's no trees in the ways to cut down, so who the heck so the axe isn't a tool they use. But I could definitely imagine Aiel using axes and being like, well, now that we're in the wetlands, like, this is a perfectly good, tool. And they pulls out like the finest battle axe you've ever seen that would be ruined if it used against a tree. This is a tool I'm just using. Totally, yeah.
Zool in chat is pointing out that Scottish dirks with a foot-long blade are not swords. Yeah, exactly. It's like it becomes academic, but I imagine that these are longer spearheads than the original Aiel ancestors had on their spears, because those were literally just for hunting. I like that Sulin looks at Rand's face and says, they did this to you. Like, she's so empathetic to what Rand's going through, and she's trying to comfort him and look out for him, because she has that very sibling relationship with him, right? She doesn't mother him, she siblings him. And she's just so empathetic to what he's really going through, more than he is, right? He's like, I'm fine. She's like, oh, they did this to you.
I love Sulin.
She's wonderful. She's great.
She's in 2 places at once in A Memory of Light, though.
Yeah, she is. Didn't they remove that? I was reading an article that it was
What?
It was there was a big error in the editing.
They made her a different maiden in one of those places. They had to fix that. Yeah. The timeline, folks.
Oh, well, that's not going to be in the audiobooks, is it? The audiobooks are going to have her in 2 places at once. Oh.
I think they do, yeah.
I never noticed that. Well, like I said, I've only done the last battle 3 times.
It's not something you'll catch unless... now that I pointed it out, you might catch it.
But it's one of those things where, like, because the 2 events happen in very different sequences in the books, they're quite a bit separated by time. It's like, and it's just like a name drop in 2 different places. Like, it's very hard.
Wibbly wobbly timey wimey.
The background behind it, too, is he had written a lot of the stuff that happens among the 3 books are kind of intermixed. And he reworked, because he was originally writing this as 1 book, and then realized there is no way this is going to be 1 book. And so he split and he moved different plot lines. That's why the timelines between The Gathering Storm and Towers of Midnight are really screwy. They're almost happening simultaneously. So you're getting 2 books that are basically happening at the exact same time. And then he had all this side stuff that he had written for A Memory of Light that they ended up taking out. And so he kind of misplaced where she was in his own head. And she ended up being in 2 different armies.
She's just that awesome.
Yeah.
So can we get the Snyder cut of the final 3 books, please? I'd like to release the Snyder cut. Can we
Well, there's a scene with, supposedly he talked about this. There's a scene with like Galad and Perrin leading an army into the ways.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that was one of the cut scenes.
That was so good. We did that.
Well, we read that. Fire in the Ways.
Okay, you did that. Okay.
Yep. Non-canon. And again, I think that's one of those things where I think Bayard or Galad dies twice, or not Galad.
No, it was Bayard.
Bayard dies twice. So if that was included, he would have had to not have it was one of those things where there's a couple other characters who were in there.
So clearly they had to catch a lot of those and smooth them out, and some ended up on the floor, some got rewritten, and 1 got missed.
It's got to be hard. There's 2,700 named characters in the Wheel of Time.
I wouldn't have missed them. No. So we meet Bale and his 2 wives, Melaine and Dorinda.
After Luce Theron gives us the title of the chapter, there are no clear paths, only pitfalls and tripwires and darkness. Ugh,
After Rand's thinking, would I know a clear path if I saw one? So, like, nope, no clear paths. There's no way through.
No.
Is the paranoia, right?
You know what, though? I almost think that's wisdom. And here's why I say that. Anybody who's been in a leadership position where where you have to make decisions that affect people, like I'm even talking on like a small scale, think like a small business or something. Even then, it sometimes feels like there can be no win scenarios where whatever decision I make is going to screw somebody, and I have to try to figure out what's going to be the best. And now you take that to the scale that Rand is in decision making. There is no good answer for what he's going to have to do.
He has to make bad choices.
There is no good answer. People are going to die no matter what he chooses to do. Okay. And, I'll give you an example. I just read Barack Obama's book, his first part of his memoir. And again, it's not political or anything. He's just talking about a lot of the things that went into the decision making while he's president. But that one of the things he's talking about is like, it doesn't matter what I did in like these 5 scenarios, it was going to be bad. Like there was no answer I could give. There was nothing I could choose that wasn't going to piss somebody off, or somebody would die, and he's like, that's just what you deal with as president. And I'm just thinking like, that's here. Like that's Rand al'Thor being the Dragon Reborn, deciding the fate of nations.
Yeah.
Some even higher stakes, right? This is like, if you don't pull this off, everything
reality is on the line.
And that's something that Luce Theron was he very much understood, because that's the position that he was in. He had a greater leadership position than Rand did. Rand does now. I mean, Luce Theron essentially ruled the world to a degree. And
he was prepared for that. He had centuries of practice and support and not being insane.
That's why I feel like this is almost because every now and then Luce Theron drops these little nuggets of wisdom on Rand. And I always felt like this was one of them, where it's like, there are no clear paths. You're never going to stop thinking that anything is ever going to be easy. It will never be easy. There's only ever going to be pitfalls that you need to avoid, tripwires. Like, that sounds depressing, but I almost think it's moderately the truth.
Yes, but there's this aspect in all of LTT's advice that's a little bit of that advice is fine. Too much of it, and all of a sudden you're the trust no one hermit holed up in your house slowly
Sure.
decaying. You know, like there's a spectrum to following LTT's advice, and like thinking there's no clear path means that sometimes when there is an easy way out and you don't have to worry about a problem and you can just walk out, you don't see it and you don't take it because you're like, oh, it must be a trick. And so you end up stuck in a morass that you could have left a long time ago.
I just saw something else that I'm going to, next time I do a reread or I get to the part where, because I'm not there yet, but where Lews Therin comes back into the picture. In that same line, he says, there are no clear paths, only pitfalls and tripwires and darkness. Lews Therin's snarl sounded sweaty and desperate, the way Rand felt. I want to go back and I want to reread this and see every time that we see Lews Therin, is this just mimicking Rand?
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
Like, is that truly what he intended? Was Lews Therin is literally just mimicking where Rand is at, and that's just Rand projecting.
Yeah.
That's been sort of my thesis as I've gone through this, that all of LTT's emotions is what Rand is actually thinking and actually feeling it, or more actually feeling than thinking, right?
And compartmentalizing it into LTT, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like LTT is constantly ranting about wanting to kill the Ashaman. Rand wants to do that. Rand is scared of them. And, he, not mentally. He understands mentally why he can't do that, but he is terrified of the Ashaman.
Yeah.
They have the one thing that makes him special, which is the one power.
And he was trained to think of all of them as scary, himself included. Right.
That's interesting. I've never read it or listened to it with that in my mind as I did it. So I definitely want to do that again and see if it kind of fits all the way through. If it's like, oh God, Robert Jordan was clearly like a super visionary that I've read the books 30 times and never caught this.
This is, I'm not sure it's like 100% explicit, but for the most part, when LTT starts ranting, it's because Rand is feeling anxiety, Rand is feeling fear, Rand is feeling some negative emotion, and he's like, no, I'm fine. And then LTT's going off in the background with this big flashing red alarm being like, you're not fine, you're not fine, you're not fine, you're not fine. And that's what that emotion is. What I think Rand is doing when he's just suppressing that noise to a buzzing is literally just pushing down the emotions.
And dissociating and compartmentalizing. Yeah, creating multiple personalities for himself.
And literally doing the thing that your therapist says don't do, which is push it down and don't talk about it to anybody.
Yeah, well, as I've heard it said on other podcasts, there are no therapists in Randland, and there needs to be a therapy, Aja. So
Rendell's open.
I also need to correct myself because chat is lovely. SpoilerCon 2020 was when we did Fire in the Ways.
That was a great episode for that. For SpoilerCon. I really enjoyed
really
Spoiler.
fun.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
I don't know how we're going to top that this year, but we'll find a way.
Don't make promises. We can.
Okay,
We'll do something.
we're gonna do
wonderful. No,
something. Yeah, I don't know how we're gonna follow up with that because that was a really good story, and I hadn't read it until like the day before, so that was fun. Anyway,
I did note here that Jordan makes a point of saying that sister wives is a very rare thing, even among Aiel.
mm-hmm.
Like, even though we know like a bunch of them, it's like even though every relationship we know about in the Aiel is sister wives, it's supposed to be rare.
Yeah, we just happen to meet all the examples.
Exactly. I think it has a lot to do with clan chiefs and responsibilities, and powerful men being much more likely to have sister wives than not powerful men. I think that's probably the comment he's making, but that's the best I can pull out of that.
Behind every super powerful man is a team.
At least two women. Yeah, at least two powerful women.
No, but the way that they're always done is it's not the man's choice. Like, I think that to a degree, this can come across as like male fantasy to have all these women. Like, I've got 3 women to choose from at once, whatever. But in reality, the way it fleshes itself out, at least the way they talk about it, is it's not his choice. Like, they get together. We're going to be sister wives. By the way, you're getting married now. Like, is almost kind of the way it kind of comes across. We talked about this on our podcast, actually, because this has been
I loved that episode.
Did you?
Yeah,
okay, I'm glad. It was a good conversation because we didn't all completely agree on everything either, which was kind of cool. But and I think it's a worthwhile discussion because the idea of polyamory being different to a degree than polygamy.
Right.
What are those differences? Is this just putting male fantasies in there where men have multiple wives. And RJ actually tells this story in an interview of where when he was in college, two girls wanted to date him together, and he did for a while. Like in the context of that discussion, it is like they actually got decided amongst themselves and then asked him. And so I almost can't help but think that's where some of this context comes from, is that discussion that RJ had with sister wives. Like they're sisters and then they're choosing you, not, hey, I'm a man, I'm going to date her and I'm going to date her and I'm going to date her.
Yeah, and I guess when I say powerful man, what I'm saying is maybe I should say power couple.
Triad?
Not couple doesn't work. Power relationship. Triad, thank you. A powerful triad, right? That because power couple is the word I was going for, but it's three
power
people.
triad.
So power triad. That like basically by having these three driven, powerful people get together, they all are advantaged from that, and then you end up with clan chiefs, roof mistresses, and wise ones together in a relationship, and it's like, holy shit, that's like the trifecta of power in the Aiel. The three of them together make a decision to push for something, they can push the entire society.
My only problem with it is the canonical non-bisexuality of the arrangements.
Right.
And that's something that I can very easily just headcanon over and hope that the show can address, because the whole arrangement makes so much more sense to me if there's complete pansexuality on the table for the Aiel culture.
Well, it makes sense in that degree, except the way that they call themselves sisters.
Which I just, again, I'm
Right,
going to
like,
headcanon
then
right over that.
Yeah.
I don't fucking, I cannot with it being a sibling
Because
thing.
you could, okay,
But
let's
sister
take
wives, right? They're
sister wives. Yeah, but then like Avienda and Elaine are sister wives.
And
But
I
kind of,
absolutely
right?
ship
They're
them so
sisters.
hard you
Yeah,
can't
we
stop
as-
it.
But they're totally a couple.
they're totally sleeping
right?
in the same bed through most of the series. Like, there's a point where Elaine's like, "Oh, that side of the bed's so cold because Avienda's not here." Like, they are in. I headcanon they're a couple.
Avienda, will you go take a bath?
Exactly.
With me?
Yeah.
Like,
there's,
Yeah, no,
Right,
they are
like-
a couple. Like I barely see it as headcanon. It's so there. So it's like that's the one thing that I think is like I wish RJ could have done better with that, just to have it on the table. Not that everyone has to be in a complete everything.
to be devil's advocate though, would that not make more people mad though? Because now you are playing totally into this perceived male fantasy with, hey, I've got two lesbians that sleep with me.
Well, that's why I'm
Like,
saying pansexuality on the table is a concept, and it's not everyone's with everyone. It's just you see lots of different variations. Then I would be okay with it, because then clearly everyone's choosing it. But it's like only the man is sleeping with multiple people. Is like, why is your dick the center of the story?
well, then you also have to normalize gay Aiel, like
Which
male gay Aiel.
Absolutely needs to be a thing. Yes.
and that's where everyone the Gaul Perrin relationship, or like Gaul.
Oh yeah, the
pining for
Stone Wolf.
Perrin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, no, like, yeah, it's so there. It's so almost there in canon. It's just not quite there, that it's like, you know, this is a great spot for the show to be like, this is how we're going to take away the weird specifics. We're just going to throw it all out there.
you got Pillow Friends and Spear Brothers.
I really like that. Spear Brothers?
I don't like pillow friends. I'll be frank with you. I think now this is coming from somebody who is bisexual, right? So like I'm coming at this from a different standpoint, but I don't like the pander. I don't like the way that they make it seem like it's a phase.
Situational lesbianism is not a
Yeah.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That, and I think it was an attempt to be progressive. So I'm going to credit that where credit is due.
Right.
However, in the very same way that Halima is not a great representation of trans, so being trans, like that's not a good representation.
I don't think it is a
Right.
representation
Right.
at all. And,
Right. Well,
yeah.
no, but I think people will attribute it. to
And
something.
I,
Yeah,
and
people
I,
ask,
yeah.
people have
You
to
know,
ask the
and-
question. Like, is
Yes.
this trans representation? And then we have to say no.
No, it's not. Yeah.
So I think you need to but on the same token of that, and I flip this around too, what I don't want to see is pandering. I don't want them to make somebody and make a big deal of something simply to make a big deal of something, right? Like I want to be represented on screen, but I don't want it to be, I don't want to be pandered to. Does that, there's a difference in
But
those two
yeah, I'd
things.
love to see
Yeah.
like when you're in the Black Tower and you see a bunch of the spouses of the Ashaman who are pissed off that Rand is doing them, have a couple of men's thrown in there.
Make it real. Like I don't think they need to add tons of gay characters or make Rand gay all of a sudden or something. You know what I mean? I don't think they need to do that. But my point is, I think there's enough in there that's canon Or I'll give you a great example of a character that would be very easy to make gay and not change the story at all. Talmanis, right? You could, I mean, he almost fits a stereotype already, and Matt kind of jabs at him. I think that could be those are the type of normalized, like, these people exist in the world because they exist in our world. That's all that it needs to be. It doesn't need to be a central theme. But I love the fact that just gay Aiel would exist, because that normalizes a lot of the stuff that I think people can find cringy, that is a little male fantasy-esque. If you have the opposite be true, it normalizes it all.
Exactly, because then you're not focusing on the specifics. You just let it be what it is, because, shocker, spoilers, that's how the world is.
Right? Shocking.
And I think we're all hoping that Rafe is going to come from a first-person perspective and have some idea of how to pull that off in his stories.
He might.
He better.
That more. One of the things I wish we talked about more is a lot of the reasons we talk about representation in Wheel of Time is because of who's making it. Because the people who are making it are themselves a better representative of the population than most filmmakers. And so I think we are super excited to see the diversity in the staff become diversity in the cast, become diversity in the entire show, in the storyline itself. Because we haven't had much to comment on other than casting, right? Like, I think that's what's led to this being a very common discussion.
Yeah, no, I mean, Robert Jordan's work is definitely very progressive for its time, because we are able to not really have to break canon to have a more diverse set of people interpreting it in a new way and be like, yes, it's updated, but like, it's not that much of canon breaking to have this in there. It's pretty much how he wrote it, despite how dated and cringy some parts are. Like,
yeah, it's mostly headcanon breaking.
Yeah, and that's a really good testament to what he wrote. He wrote something flexible enough that we can see ourselves even in that. We can still be like, no, I see my representation and I want it to come a little more forward.
In my Discord server, and I'm sure you guys have this too, most Wheel of Time fans are, I would say, between the ages of 30 and 50, okay, on average. I would say 30 is on the low end for the most part. Now, there are a brand new group of fans who are in that younger generation that don't necessarily understand, like, maybe grew up in a different time, because I will see this. It's very obvious, because the people that are super critical of RJ and saying that, well, I don't care, time doesn't matter, it's not, he didn't do a good enough job with representation. It's like, guys, like when I grew up in high school, there was not a single, I had a graduating class of almost 600. There was not a single openly gay person in my entire class, let alone my entire high school. I mean, if you think about this, Ellen was the first openly gay television show, like, and that was in the mid to late 90s, right? Was the first time that a gay woman was on TV. To the degree that he even put this in the books to begin with, at the time that he started writing these, I think is significant, because it was a different time. And it's weird to think that 25 years ago was that different of a time, but it really was. Yeah. It really was. And I think that's hard for younger people to maybe understand, because they've grown up in a world with marriage and equality, I should say, to a degree, right? It's legal now to be married and gay. It wasn't 10 years ago. Right. So
yeah.
Anyway,
even it wasn't that long before that where even heterosexual relationships in media weren't that normalized. Showing people in two different beds in the beginning of TV was very common, right? Like, just the march of representation on all sexualities, starting with straight representation, has come so far in media.
That sexuality exists.
Yeah. And that, like, first of all, yeah, we had to acknowledge that it existed, and then we had to acknowledge that it was not the same for everybody, and then we had to, like, start acknowledging the ways it was different for everybody. Yeah.
Well, go back to the mid-'60s. Star Trek had the first interracial kiss on television. And it caused a major uproar where people were writing into the studio talking about the disgusting stuff that they were putting on TV.
And it's such a
people
corny
think
kiss.
The representation. Yeah, and it is. It's stupid. But the idea that representation doesn't matter, that stuff can normalize things. And that's, to me, why the representation is important, that they nail it in the right way. If it is pandering, it misses the point. If it's simply to say, look, these people exist and they're here, that's where I differentiate with the Pillow Friends. Like, I don't like that per se, because I feel like it is cringy to say, oh, it's just a phase, because anytime you put a bunch of boys or a bunch of girls together, they're just going to start screwing with each other. Like, no, that doesn't happen. It might if they're already bi or gay, but it doesn't, you
Which
know what I mean?
probably
Like
will, because some of them probably will be, because we're everywhere. But yeah.
I worked at a military high school briefly, teaching, and a bunch of people got sent there when their parents discovered them smoking pot for the first time. Well, when you put a bunch of boys together in a dorm who all just smoke pot for the first time, guess what happens? They all find ways to get pot and learn from each other, and one of them knows how to get different drugs, and it gets worse. And it's like, what are you doing? You're concentrating the problem in one place. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And thinking you can solve it by like being stricter is not gonna work for you, no matter what. So don't recommend taking a bunch of women who might be experimenting with their sexuality and sending them off to a school together where they sleep in the same room, right? Like, you know, yes, that's probably not a good solution if you're trying to prevent underage people from sleeping together.
right?
Yeah, and it always made sense to me that Aes Sedai would find a lot of relationships with each other because of the lifespan aspect, if nothing
Sure.
else. Like, you study together, you go through these trials together, you know that you're going to outlive almost everyone except each other. Like, it makes sense, but yeah, the whole it's just a phase is like...
Well, the idea that an Aes Sedai will go through 7 warders in her lifetime because they're all going to die of old age.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get romantically involved with a warder. Fuck that. Like...
Haha.
Or don't fuck that,
Or don't-
as the
okay.
case may be.
I mean, if you think about it, like, well, now we're way off topic. See,
We haven't even.
my
No,
bad.
you're
That's why
fine.
I have this approach. But like Ramonda's like 320 years old or something. Like, how many warders has she had? My God.
Right?
I mean, I think
Like, that's
Cogswain's
a
one of the
long
only Aes Sedai that we see just like keep going through them. Like she's just like, oh, yep, give me another. Like, because she goes through so many warders.
Put that in perspective. That would mean that an Aes Sedai in our time, like Cadsuane, would have been born about the same time that Boston was being founded. Like, she would have been born somewhere around, a little after that, probably around like 1670, like that's how old she
That's
is.
how old-fashioned she is.
Yeah. Imagine if we still had the founding fathers running around today being like,
Kids
youngins.
these days!
Yeah.
Lews Therin was 400 years old.
Right.
Lews Therin would have been born in 1600.
But you have to wonder, how do people keep changing over those years, right? What
That's
happens
fair.
to
That's
someone
fair.
who lives that long? Do they become...
Because they're not getting older in like physical sense.
Yeah.
Like, they can still do whatever.
People tend to stick with the things they learned in their youth. Like, we know that old people like the music that they listen to in their 20s, or that's still my favorite music, always will be. Doesn't matter how old I get, right? Like,
This grocery
there's
store is really
certain-
playing by jams.
But okay, I challenge you on that though. Think Betty White, somebody who's been in entertainment, who has consciously been like, she's still funny now, and she's like 100 years old.
But she's the exception, not the rule.
Well, but my point is like, she's somebody that has stayed in a spotlight where she has to keep up. She hasn't been allowed to necessarily get old. Aes Sedai are going to be up on the latest everything, unless they're just retiring off to the middle of nowhere to do their thing. Like, they're always going to be at the forefront of knowledge because they have more of it than anybody. Power, because they have more of it than anybody. Money, because they have more of it than just about anybody. Right? They make 10,000 gold crowns a year, which is like the equivalent of like $10 million.
But then there's like Van Dien and Adelius, you know, those who are like off in their little hut on their own. Like,
That's the thing, is that they don't lose the brain functions nearly as early, right? So they can stay way more open and receptive to learning experiences for centuries before they start to get...
Well, then scale it out to like Nynaeve, how long she's going to live without the Oath Rod. Like, she's projected to live to be 800.
Right.
I'm curious. It would be interesting to see a Aes Sedai slowly going senile. And what would you do with a powerful Aes Sedai who maintained all their power, but didn't know what decade they were in anymore? Didn't know who their family was anymore?
Isn't that essentially what they gentle men for?
I
Basically.
feel like a cup of wine would probably be
Yeah,
the way to go.
solve that problem.
Put her down. I kind of think Charles Xavier in Wolverine, in the movie Logan. Yeah, like just kind of going crazy. Still crazy powerful, but
That would be frightening.
Oh, were we reading a chapter
We
in the Wheel of
were.
Time?
We started
or-
at Sister Wives.
I forgot.
We started at Sister Wives
Sister
and ended up
Wives
at
is what set
Wolverine.
us off on this tangent. Wow.
You guys said meander, so I felt like,
Yeah,
okay,
no, you know, I
tangent
did.
it is.
Colliver has taken up farming. Davram has interesting marital advice. Bale gets stabbed for having opinions.
Ugh. But yeah, I want to stop a moment to talk about that. Getting stabbed as a method of marital enforcement is something Jordan has no problem with.
Yeah, not
something
cool.
That's not
That's
cool.
abuse.
Yeah.
Marriage knives.
A little bit of hair pulling, fine.
Yeah.
Stabbing people, not fine.
Not fine.
You've
Not
crossed
fine.
the line when you draw blood.
Just a point, you know, when people really get mad at Thailand for pulling out a knife on Matt, I'm like, she didn't actually stab him though. Like, and here we just brush right by it. Casual stabbing.
Well, in fairness, in Matt's scene, the narrative also rushes right by it. It's those of us that have a problem with assault that get hung up on it.
Yeah. So, and this is what I get hung up on this a little bit as well, right? Like this casual, like stabbing your husband
funny.
to enforce your. Yeah. It's
not funny.
Yeah, it's not funny.
This is going to, first of all, I want to preface this by saying I'm not defending the action at all. Okay. Because it's the same. I think it's easy. It's good for us to be able to judge it and say that's clearly not something that fits in our society. Right. If I flip that around, though, there are what I think I would not have Robert Jordan write it differently. Okay. In the same way that I don't agree with pretty much anything the Sean Chan do, but I don't want any of those things removed from the story. Okay. Because there are cultures that have really weird customs. Okay. Like I'll give you an example of something that in the United States sounds appalling. France just made it illegal to have sex with somebody under the age of 15. The fact that that wasn't illegal up until a few days ago is strange here, right? Very strange.
What do you mean?
It's just an example of what I'm talking about.
You can get married at the age of 12 because you were raped in this country.
Yeah. Again, I'm not condoning those things. What I'm saying though is that in different cultures, there are really weird customs that they don't think anything of because it has been so ingrained. Think about how hard it is for us to drop racism, sexism in our culture. And we even kind of know that those things are bad to a degree.
And the point I guess I was trying to make is necessarily not that everyone gets hung up on the Thailand thing. And there's so much more of that. There's so much more of that in all.
Way more.
And this is another example, right? Like this is why are we so hung up on that one example when it happens in so many of the relationships so often throughout Wheel of Time? That's I guess what the point I was trying to say.
Well,
yeah.
and I guess my point is a separate one because I agree with you. I just think that there are a lot of people I've seen say, well, we should remove those things from the story. And my point of view on it is I don't have to agree with everything that happens in the story because that's a part of the distinction of these cultures. Because trust me, Rand thinks that's weird. You don't find people doing that necessarily in the Two Rivers. They'll box your ears, which is a horrible thing to do to somebody.
Separate issue.
I'll take your hearing away. But, you know, you don't see them stabbing their wives or something. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't happen there. So there are cultural differences. And I think that's one of the things Robert Jordan very clearly was trying to do is establish that these cultures do feel very weird to each other. And they all kind of view them that way. Like everybody thinks the Aiel are weirdos. The Sean Chan are awful. The Sean Chan don't think they're awful. They think they're normal. Everybody else is weird. And I think that's what he was going for. My opinion on it is, again, I can think that all of those things are wrong. Don't hear me saying I'm defending any of that. I'm not.
And I think one of the ways I look at that is him saying every culture has abuses and issues in it that they don't see. And I'm trying to showcase those in various different ways in various different cultures. In Randland, in Two Rivers, you have toxic masculinity. Aiel culture, you have stabbing each other, and Ebu Dar, you have stabbing each other.
Don't forget spanking.
And to go back to your point before about the Aiel being held up as some sort of special level of noble, here's a great example of how they aren't because they're stabbing each other in their marriages. This is how you know they are not special and honorable.
Right. I think a lot of people do really like the Aiel culture, though, because it has a code of honor, and they like the idea of Ji'ito, and the Ji'ito is I sort of see the honor in like taking the Dark One prisoner rather than killing him is how Rand comes to realization, you know. So there's some inherent honor in the culture that I think people see elevating it.
Yeah, just don't imitate all aspects of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's flawed.
Right.
But yeah, no, I agree. Taking it out of the show would be a disservice to the story.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Is I just want to be very clear. I am not defending stabbing, abuse,
Right, yeah.
slavery. Not defending
No.
those things. Don't hear me say that.
No, of course not.
I'm just saying I don't want them removed simply because they don't fit in what I think culture should.
They should just be handled
right.
well. Don't play this stuff for laughs.
I agree with that, and I also agree that I don't want it to only ever happen to women.
Yes.
Like, you get what I mean? Like, there is because that's also a theme, and that's a whole different discussion we could have. But
even spread of the bad shit, please. And even spread of the non-consensual nudity, please. Or just less of non-consensual nudity and more of consensual nudity. That would be great, too.
Right now, every one of your listeners thinks that Nae'Blis condones slavery and stabbing.
And we are starting the episode with that quote. So let's see if we can actually get a little further in the chapter.
I think that's where we should go to. Yeah, has Elaine arrived? Not yet.
Not yet, basically. And he's like, "Oh well, then what the hell is the point of all of this?"
So he was basically being a complete drama queen,
exactly,
for nothing.
For nothing.
There's no audience to be dramatic for. Congratulations, such a teenager.
Well, what he was trying to do was sneak. He just didn't want anyone to know he was there.
He should have woven himself a goddamn mask of mirrors like he does later when he comes back to impregnate her.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been easier.
Oh yeah,
but
does he know how to do that?
Yeah.
Has he done it yet?
Yeah, he did it with he hid Egwene before
that was
he got
behind
captured.
Bent light.
He still wove it.
Yeah,
though.
and he recognized the mask of mirrors when the Aes Sedai came to confront him, and he was like, "Do you think to impress me with that?" Yeah, basically, he should know it by now. He should have,
or be able to figure it out.
But he's being dramatic, presumably because he's overreacting to everything because he's still really traumatized from Dumais Wells and hasn't really fully suppressed that yet. It's still on its way down on the suppression process.
Yes.
We get this really great quote from Dira. When you leap from a cliff, it is too late for anything but holding to your courage. And hoping there's a Haywain at the bottom to land in. I mean, I agree with Davram. That's funny.
It is funny. And I love how the men are like, oh, that means we must make our best effort to charge forward. And she's like, that's not really what I meant. I meant once you jumped off a cliff, you kind of just hold your breath.
Yeah, maybe you should not jump off a cliff.
Not jump off the cliff. Right, yeah. And the men are like, we are falling off a cliff. We must fall with intention, And then she's like, don't jump. Maybe. Don't jump.
This is why there's so many of the wives involved in this council, is because they don't trust their husbands to plan shit at this point. They're like, Oh, and then Rand is confused about where Matt is because he thinks that Matt is with the army that's moving across Altara or Miradi, and it's like, well, you're not going to find out for a couple of books, but that's not where Matt is.
Yeah, he's down in Ebu Dar with Elaine.
Matt's on a different trajectory at this point. And then there's this interesting thing where Rand is paying attention to maps and stuff, and there's all these conversations happening behind him that he's not paying attention to, so it's easy for you as the reader to not pay attention to, but it's also right there. And then he catches up with the conversation like pages later, and it's like funny to you have to go back and reread them like a few times to be like, okay, this is Rand's actual process, because he's hearing all this stuff and just not processing it and thinking about completely different things. He's thinking strategically, well, they're all talking interpersonally about politics and his reactions, and he's just like maps.
I always thought it was weird. I never took any of these little rebellions very seriously. And I suppose neither did Rand.
Sure.
To a degree, right? Like, because they make a big point to say all these people are rebelling against him. And it's like, dude, you have 700,000 Aiel that will do whatever the hell you tell them to. And you're talking about these little measly armies of like 10,000 people camped.
With no channelers.
Like, I don't know. I never made it a big deal in my head. And I don't understand why they ever kind of considered it that way. And I maybe they don't, because Rand, I guess at one point says, let them stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can rot. It's fine.
And I feel like when he walks out to the rebel camp in a costume and mocks them basically to their faces, I feel like, yeah, he's not taking it seriously either, right? And then Fane shows up, and suddenly what was a very lighthearted situation becomes very, very serious.
Mm-hmm.
But that was him just basically poking. He's like, I'm going to go out there and poke fun at Ryoton.
Because they're so dumb. I'll just go kick them over.
Well, and I love watching Rand's little Taviran stuff work on Darla.
Yeah.
And Colliver, and Moraine's cousin. What's her name?
Caroline.
I love watching. And obviously, we're talking about a chapter later, but you said tangents, okay? So you can't yell at me. But I love that, watching that happen.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's a fun scene to watch him walk in and everyone be like, "Oh, it would be such a coincidence if so-and-so showed up. Hello! And that so-and-so shows up. Like, there's that fun little coincidence of that scene. Yeah.
Yeah. This is not that, though. This is a lot of catching up and exposition.
Yeah, we are jumping through this because there's some stuff here that just isn't
It's
need
just,
to be
yeah,
talked about.
yeah, they're never serious threats aside from helping drive Rand into random situations that have nothing to do with the actual politics. Some of it sets up for Elaine later, but we can talk about it when we get to Elaine.
And some of it sets up for the attack on Ilion, but we can talk about that when we get to that later. Yeah.
We have another reminder that Rand doesn't have his little Buddha that allows him to, nerf all of the Forsaken.
Well, and this is the explanation. Before he was tearing through the wagons, and Perrin is like, he can get a better jacket when we get home. Why is he looking for a jacket? And it's not. He was looking for the Buddha.
And it's so funny because it's like...
Which apparently he goes back and finds later.
Which is
but...
Apparently, randomly, that appears for no reason. Sanderson.
Even when he was desperate for it, he didn't find it. But sure, later when he's Zen...
I think it was that Sanderson needed a reason for Rand to be able to kill 100,000 Trollocs by himself.
He couldn't just have found another one.
He had written it and needed to go back and retcon how that was possible. So, he found the Angreal. That was kind of a little drop that we got later.
Yeah. I just wish he would have found a different one. Like, couldn't you just have they're all over the place, apparently. Why do you have to make this one show? Oh, whatever.
Also, the whole, if with this one, I can defeat any Forsaken. Unless they also have one? is that not... Did that
Because
never
the Forsaken totally wouldn't bring a gun to a gunfight.
Right,
That's ridiculous.
One of the Forsaken should have been able to make them. Just saying.
Seriously. Or, known how to find
or do
them,
something.
Or broken into the White Tower, or...
Well, that's the biggest plot hole in the entire story, in my opinion, is why they didn't just travel into the...
So much frustration.
I've said those words.
Why
didn't they
just steal
go
the
get
Sangreal?
Sangreal? Can you imagine laying through a Sangreal? Yeah.
Masana knew where it was. Come on.
There's so many caches all over the place that are known to exist. Yeah, this is why playing D&D in Wheel of Time is hard, is because you can very quickly break everything because you've actually thought about how the power should actually be used.
Yeah, once you think of Quendiar engine parts, everything else from there is downhill.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you're like, wait, if I mix science and magic, I can do anything.
Well, there you have the Age of Legends.
Yeah. Yeah, then you might literally make a wormhole in the middle of your research center or whatever the fuck happened there.
Connecting to the ancient power of evil that created the universe. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's generally what happens. You could just create the shattering. It's fine.
And I just want to point out that the reason he went and got the Choden Call is because he couldn't find the Fat Man Terangreal. There are 9 Aes Sedai at an inn called the Silver Swan. Is that Codswain?
No. Codswain's in Kyrian.
No, so there's 2 groups, right? So there's the Red Sisters who are appearing and then disappearing.
Yeah, both of the groups are having the coming and goings. There's 2 different groups of different sizes, but they have the same, trickling in and trickling out.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure what this group is. Is this Rebels?
No. These are the, if I remember right, these are some of the Aes Sedai that were sent to break down the Black Tower.
No, those are the Reds, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, these are Reds.
No, these aren't.
There's a reference to 2 groups here. The 9 Aes Sedai at an inn called the Silver Swan. Those are not Reds. They all have warders. Then there's a second group of Reds who are trickling in and out of the city. And those are Tovane's Reds who are going to attack the Black Tower. We're trying to figure out which group of Aes Sedai are the not Reds. And I would assume the Rebel Tower.
Could it be the Black Aja?
They all have warders. Is it? No, because they're coming and going. Because it's not just the one group. It must be. But
the Rebels, why would they be there? Because they have their embassy that they already went to him with.
And it can't be anything to do with Cadswain because she's, a solo.
She's in Kyrian.
Yeah, and she's in Kyrian.
Well, she has a crew, but they're all in Kyrian.
Yeah, this is.
She can't travel yet.
And almost a month ago. What is almost a month ago? What was happening almost a month ago?
Rand got captured. He was on the road for a while.
So, okay, looking at the wiki, since we're not pulling it out of our heads. As Red Sisters did not stay there, and the Rebel Aes Sedai stayed at the Crown of Roses Inn, it can be assumed those at the Silver Swan were most likely unaligned sisters, presumably owing allegiance to Codswain. Sisters continued to stay there after Rand left the city. They never approached Elaine. The Sea Folk sent an ambassador there demanding the return of...
Morel and Shallan?
Talon and Morel, yeah.
Oh, Talon, right.
Because those 2 disappeared, but Obviously, those Aes Sedai would know nothing about it, but presumably that's how Amelia met the Windfinders.
Well, I could honestly think of like Lyanna having her Tarvalin network of eyes and ears. I could see Cad Swain having like Aes Sedai eyes and ears, basically being like, okay, come to the city and just watch and communicate and tell me everything and don't do anything. Like,
I just think the connected to Codswain seems a stretch.
It's a stretch, but like,
I think so too.
What else? Because it's not Tovann.
There's a huge group of Black Aja sisters that come there that we know stay in Camelin. That Elaine isn't sure who they are for a while until. I'm just saying, like, I don't. I'm trying to remember who else. I don't think it could be with Cadswain because this is before travel.
For Cadswain,
this is before there's any travel.
Right.
So, and Cadswain can't travel, and nor is communication that fast at this point between the two cities. You know, they're 500 miles apart. So,
what I'd assume though is unaligned sisters is correct, because we do know about a third of the sisters are in the White Tower, about a third of the sisters in the Rebel Tower, but there are other little groups who are just sort of standing by and waiting to see what happens.
And there's Black Aja.
And there's Black Aja. Yeah.
You've definitely got, they could be moving around too under like Black Aja orders, unaligned or otherwise. And yeah, they just kind of go their own ways and end up where they end up, depending on how the story plays out. Like Robert Jordan's just like stashing a bunch of them because he knows he's going to need them later. He's just like, just go be over there. But yeah, I can imagine that if you're unaligned, you might end up wanting to hang out with other unaligned sisters to be like, well, at least collectively we're a group. But they don't really do anything ever. I mean, but yeah, the part where there's no reds with them. But it's funny because Tovann's party does have more than reds. And none of those are unaligned or Black Aja by definition. So it could be both. It could be multiple groups that are just like, you know, pretending not to know each other. I don't know. Oh, Super Skylike is mentioning Duhara.
Yeah, I was reading her wiki.
That's the group I thought it was.
Oh, because they come for Elaine. They don't come for the Black Tower.
Are they sent by Moghedian?
No, they're sent by Elida.
They're sent by Alviarin.
Well, yeah.
Well, they're technically sent by Elida, but yes, by Alviarin.
Yeah, they're sent by the White Tower itself to Elaine to try to support her in her quest for the throne.
But Elaine hasn't come to Camelin
Right.
yet, so I don't know that could be them yet.
Well,
Elida and Alviarin know that Morghese is missing, so they could have sent a delegation to Camelin ahead of whatever actually happens. Like, well, Elaine's going to show up or something.
Well, but they also know that Rand was there, so I don't know. I'm just thinking, like,
yeah, this is a weird one. I'm guessing that there's a lot of different parties that are actually interacting, and just because we never have a POV close enough to it, we don't know all the specifics. Because there's a lot of people moving through.
Yeah, I mean, Elida sends Duhara to Camelin in Knife of Dreams.
Oh, so that's like 10 days from now, the way the book's timeline compresses.
Right, so it's a while from now,
Okay.
so it can't be them yet. So unaligned has to be is unaligned or black. Hey, this is Editing Seth. I've done a fair amount of research into this. There's not a lot of evidence as to what's going on here. In Crossroads of Twilight, we find out that green, gray, brown, and yellow sisters are all staying here, but not blue or red, which makes me think, again, neutral sisters. We also see 3 brown sisters send a message via pigeon from the Hoop and Arrow, and that information is sent back to the White Tower, so that doesn't give us any more information than we already had. I do think these are independent Aes Sedai. Yeah, for as much screen time as these Aes Sedai get, it's very surprising to me that we don't have more information as to who they are or who they're aligned with. And we don't get a resolution, as far as I can tell, as to where they end up. They're in Camelin, up until it's invaded, I guess, by the Trollocs. If you have any information, if you have any ideas, I'd love to get an email about this.
Now, the one thing that I thought was interesting was, this is kind of aside, the next part of this conversation is they're talking about Andoran politics and Dylan imprisoning people, but they say Dylan imprisons them with Pelavar and Luon, who we later find out are down combating, like standing up to Egwene.
Yeah, on the meeting on the ice.
Like, why were they in Erengil, and then they made Dylan the regent until Elaine returns, but then all of a sudden they're against Elaine?
No, they're not.
Because that's the wording here. It says that.
Because I always thought that it was that they were backing Dylan up.
Well, they were, but they said until Elaine returns is the way that it's worded. Maybe that's just the way that it's said.
I think, and then Elaine, by default, Elaine will then become queen.
It says they announced Dylan as regent the next morning in Elaine's name until Elaine returns. Most of the houses of Andor have declared support for Dylan. I think they would like for her to take the throne herself, but Arengil keeps even the most powerful careful of their tongues because she imprisoned them. But before that, the line before that is, and by sunset, Dylan, Pelavar, and Luon had arrested them both in reference to Elenia. And anyways, I just, the way that it's worded or the way that Bashir is saying it implies that Pelavar and Luon were backing Dylan as the regent until Elaine returns.
They do get very prickly about the transition once Elaine and Dylan are in the same room. They're like, Dylan, please. If Elaine agrees, will you agree? And then Dylan's like, no.
But Pelavar and Luon are two of the houses that confront the Aes Sedai army moving up through Andor. That Egwene uses to kind of solidify power.
That's a weird... I don't get a lot about that scene.
That's where we get deep into the politics.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to hold my hand for that because I'm just like,
fair enough.
This is a bunch of saber rattling and I don't like it.
No, and we get a little bit of that going on here where it's a little bit of name soup, where we have all these different houses who are like just supporting different folks, but...
Well, we may have been recording for 2 hours and 20 minutes, so...
Yeah, our brains are a little fried at this point, so
yeah.
I think we've... Maybe I should just read us out. So this is Rand basically being like, okay, I'm out, right? Elaine's not here, everything's fine, I don't need to do anything.
Yeah, it's good delegation.
I'm piecing out. Yeah, it's good delegation.
He's like, nothing's on fire, I'm gonna go see what else might be on fire.
And so he says, Fedwin there's an Ashaman, he said. He can bring messages to me in Cairhien, if there's need. That with a glare from Elaine, who returned the blandest sort of look. Thera studied Fedwin as she might a dead rat some overeager dog had dropped on her rug. Davram and Bale were more considering. Fedwin tried to stand straighter under their gaze. Don't let anyone know who he is, Rand went on. No one. That's why he isn't wearing black. I am taking 2 more to Lord Samandrid and High Lord Weirman tonight. They'll have what they need when they face Samael in the Dorlan Hills. I will be busy chewing on Cairhien for a while yet, it seems. And maybe Andor, too. Does this mean you will send the spears forward at last? Bale said. You give the orders tonight? Rand nodded, and Bashir gave a great hoot of laughter. Now that calls for good wine, or it would if it wasn't hot enough to make a man's blood thick as porridge. Laughter slid into a grimace. Burn me, but I wish I could be there. Still, I suppose holding Caemlyn for the Dragon Reborn is no small thing. You always want to be where the swords are bared, my husband. Thera sounded quite fond. The 5th, Bale said. You will allow the 5th in Ilion when Samael has fallen. Aiel custom allowed the taking of 5th, of all that was in a place taken by force of arms. Rand had forbidden it in Caemlyn. He would not give Elaine a city looted, even that much. They will have the 5th, Rand said. But it was not of Samael or Ilion that he thought. Bring Elaine quickly, Matt. It ran wild in his head, across Lewin's Theron's cackling. Bring her quickly, before Andor and Cairhien both erupt in my face.
Oh.
Big bada boom.
Big bada boom. So yeah, basically he's dancing on an edge between these two cities, not really knowing what to do with them, because as you said in the beginning of this, he's a terrible leader, and he's hoping that Elaine can come back and take them off his hands.
Because he knows she's a good leader. She's taught him like half of what he knows about leadership. He's like,
Probably 90. What Morghese hasn't taught him, he learned from Elaine. Moraine, thank you.
To his credit, she was taught. He wasn't.
Very much so. That's why it's a good that he wants her back to take over.
He was allowed to study the night before the test. She actually took the whole class. Right? Like, he had the cram, of course. Okay, we got Fedwin going as an Ashaman to Cairhien. He's taking 2 more to Lord Samandred and High Lord Weramon. Dark friend alert, High Lord Weramon's a dark friend, and he's getting a hold of one of the Ashaman.
He's also an idiot, though.
Well, yes. How much of that idiot is him being a dark friend, and how much of that is him actually being an idiot? It's debatable. So I'll debate you over it someday, because I think he's smarter than he looks, and he's deliberately being obtuse to make Rand fail.
That's fair.
Who's Lord
Samaradrid?
Yeah.
I don't remember. I think he's
Aradia.
He's a tyrant lord that doesn't do anything except not be a dark friend.
I think he's Cairhienan, isn't he?
Highest lord from Cairhien sent to the plains of Moredo, where Randalthor is gathering a massive army.
Oh yeah, he's one of the main names in that whole failed battle scene. That's where I know him from. And yeah, he doesn't do anything remarkable. He's just there while Rand is falling apart.
Rand doesn't trust him due to his house having an alliance with House Ryoton.
But he's not actually ever a dark friend or a betrayer or anything.
As far as we know,
not
no,
remarkable.
he's not a dark friend. No, he's not remarkable in any way.
So I might have gotten his nation wrong, but I remembered that he's not worth remembering.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yes, he is pretty much not worth remembering.
But it makes Wyramon seem like an equal character, right? Like, now that I know he's a dark friend, he stands out. But at the time, Samaradrid and Wyramon were often mentioned together, right? Like, either one could have been the dark friend, either one could have been fine. Like, they could have both been unmemorable.
Anything else you wanted to say about that chapter? Or do we tangent hard enough on that?
I'd say we did a pretty good job.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and tangenting with us.
Yeah, really appreciate us. That was a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah, have to do it again. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Hard tangents, but you know.
Always down to talk some wheel time. I was just gonna say, anytime you need some really hard tangents.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of chapters coming up that might be a little sloggy. That I might be like, hey, let's pull up Nae'Blis and tangent hard on that.
I'm all about the tangents.
All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and turn recording off.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate the time you gave to this, and how much fun it was.
You know, it's funny. I had always said I would never do a podcast because I don't listen to a lot of podcasts myself normally, and so it was I got asked by Brian, who runs Wheel Talk for Kappa Sedai, and
he's been our guest for the last 3 episodes. So yeah.
That's what he was saying.
That, we had Jess on.
Actually rounding out the trifecta now.
Basically, at this point, the Tarvalon, you were the last Tarvalon After Dark member to come on in, like, I think it's in order too. So it's like 1, 2, 3. So yeah, not intended, but a nice happy accident. Yeah.
Well, it's been fun though. It's definitely a different medium, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So from what I gathered from your story, you're not a rereader. You've just gone through it once.
Oh, okay. No, I am a rereader.
I was like, I don't...
I'm probably well past 35 or 40 times now. The thing, once I started, so I had read it a lot before.
What's your medium of choice before? Audio?
Now it's Audible. Okay. Because I travel a lot and I can always listen. And so I'm basically on a constant Audible cycle where I'm just... But I do like the reading part of it too. I just think with Audible, I get something different out of it every time, because, you know, when you're listening to a book, your attention is kind of not always 100% on the book you're listening to. At least that's how it is for me. But I feel like I catch something different every time I listen to the books, which is what makes this series so unique, is that I think you can reread it 30 times plus.
Right.
And still feel like you're learning something new every time you read it, or catching something you didn't catch before.
I mean, we almost always yet to have an episode without one of us going, you know, saying something, the other one going like, oh, I didn't realize that. I never noticed that before. Or, oh, that's clever. You know, like, how many times an episode does that happen? Yeah. You know, and that's just with the 2 or 3 people who we have on. I know the listeners have that same realization, you know, all the time. And so it's really, that's the pleasure of this podcast, is really trying to pull every single one of those details out that we can, and really like having that enjoyment one chapter at a time in a group setting.
For sure.
And finding our fellow serial rereaders who obsess about it and can actually appreciate the level of nerddom and be like, oh, only 12 reads? Well, I've done 20. Well, I've done 30. Like, it's so fun to find us.
Well, and at some point you stop counting because it's like, well,
it's all a wheel.
It's pointless. I've done a bunch of partial rereads. I've done this book.
I know I've only done the last battle 3 times. I know that. But
sometimes the book plays while I'm asleep for 12 hours.
Right.
Does that count? Yes, it does.
I used to be a big reader outside of Wheel of Time. I would say the real Wheel of Time ruined me when it comes to reading. I have trouble keeping my attention span on other fantasy books. Probably the only other book series, like even Sanderson for that matter, is hard to keep my attention. And the only other series that's really I've been able to kind of stick with and finish, although it'll never get finished at this point, is Song of Ice and Fire. But because I was a big fan of that too, prior to when the show came out, which is actually really cool to me because the parallels of where that fandom was coming in to when that show released and to where the Wheel of Time fandom is now. First of all, I mean, I don't know if the Wheel of Time fandom is a lot bigger. I mean, I would say it's still comparable in size now, except we don't have a show yet.
Right.
So it's going to grow. I mean, everybody I've talked to, everybody I've read, everybody that I've met in this industry, and I've met a few people now, I would say this: be prepared for your podcast through the roof.
I've been hearing that, but the proof is in the pudding, and I think, and I hate to say this, but I think there's going to be a tiered reaction, right? I think that some podcasts are going to do well, some aren't. Some YouTube channels are going to do well, some aren't. There's going to be, and I think there's going to be a lot of newcomers on the scene, and there might be a lot of people who have been on the scene for a long time who might get left behind.
Yeah, because you have to. Well, there are new mediums now.
Yeah,
and there are new ways of interacting with fans. I was. It's funny. I had this conversation with Matt Hatch from the Dusty Wheel Theoryland, and we were talking about this. There is sort of although I would probably include myself in the old school fandom, I was not in the old school content creation.
Same.
There are sort of two sets of fandoms right now.
Yes,
there's the old school folks who were the big Theoryland people, and then there are kind of the new YouTube generation, or you can call it podcasting generation, all of those new mediums that weren't necessarily a thing.
Right.
The Discord generation.
Oh my God, the amount of Discord that happens with the fandom is just like...
But Matt Hatch has managed to span that.
He's
one of the few people that's managed to come forward into the new era and really be successful, and also have been successful in the old era. But there are people like Jason Denzel. He's still running Dragon Mount, and that's great, but I don't think it's the source of a lot of fan action at this point.
I think that he's going to be putting some time. My last conversation with Jason is I think that he wants to kind of build that back up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's sort of one of those things that it's like, how long do I want to keep doing this? And now that it's all kind of coming back around, because there was a period there where there wasn't a lot of action in the Wheel of Time fandom.
It was done.
That's the series was done. There was and that's the period I stepped into with the podcast, because I was fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to start the podcast really about a year and a half before the announcement dropped. And I think that was normally just bad timing on my part that got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really good timing.
It's nice to have 350 episodes. This is 351 that we're recording today.
Mm-hmm.
Two? Okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Hey, we're on episode 7.
Right. But that's an accomplishment. I mean, every milestone means something, is what I found as a podcast. Is getting past 5 episodes means you're probably going to keep making it. Getting past 10 episodes means you've probably got a little bit of a fan base, getting, and like, it's just, as you grow and as you produce more episodes, you get better and refine your technique and all that kind of stuff.
We wanted to try something different too. I mean, when we started it, it wasn't that like what I did here's when people ask me about YouTube, and I love the fact that more people, I think there should be more Wheel of Time YouTubers. I really do think it helps everybody when there's more popular people generating buzz. But if you're going to do something, either do it better than the other people that are doing it, or find your own niche. Like, do you get what I mean? Like, it wouldn't make a ton of sense for me to come in and make a reread podcast that does the exact same thing that your podcast is doing. Like, I don't feel like that. Now I'm splitting an audience, where if we can create something unique and different, and that's sort of why I'll use Brian as an example in the YouTube space. Like, Wheel Talk is something completely on of itself. I mean, there's nothing like that. There's nothing that's funny like that. Mm-hmm. And not that this is the forum for it, but I was going to say, anybody that wants to get into content creation, find your niche and go for it.
Don't imitate, create.
No.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, and we found the spoilers niche, right? And a lot of people don't want to go and just like dig in as deep as you can, that read through. And I know that's not a unique format, but it was unique to the Wheel of Time when we started it, and that's something that I've really been happy to maintain.
And it's fun to like support other projects and see them follow their things and follow their niches and like flower into these things that you could never have created. Like, that's, I think, part of why this community is so mutually supportive, is because we all see each other doing different shit
Sure.
And we're just
Right.
like different things. And we're just so excited to see where that's going to go. And it's easy to then share fandoms, right? And like pass around our audiences so that way everyone finds exactly which one is right for them. Because lots of people have to go shopping before they find the one that hits. And like the fact that we're all cross-posting and cross-pollinating means that it's easier for people to find what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because not everyone wants a 2-hour in-depth chapter-by-chapter analysis, right? Like, that's not what a lot of people are looking for. And I know that, and I'm not trying to sell that to everybody. A lot of times they want the 5-minute, summary YouTube channel that they can consume quickly and with all their senses and is more entertaining, as opposed to... But sometimes they're on a commute, and all they've got is headphones, and a YouTube channel just doesn't work.
No, and you mentioned one other thing, and I think this is the other thing I would add for anybody that wants to make content is not only do you want to make your own thing, like you want to have your own niche, but the other side of that is like you need to be entertaining.
Sure.
It's not like there is a trap, in my opinion, that I've watched a lot of creators fall into of catering to their diehard audience only. Like that's the people in my Discord server, for instance. Like if they say, here's the content I want you to make. Well, you're going to watch whatever I do. Like we want everybody to come in and see this. And so sometimes I think the most successful podcasts, YouTube channels, TV shows, when you name it, it doesn't matter what it is. It's content. It doesn't necessarily have to be funny, but it needs to be entertaining. Like I need to add value in a way that people want to come back over and over and over again. You guys have obviously pulled that off. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason people come back.
Yeah, we don't cater. We really don't. We just do what we want to do.
Sometimes we try and add value to it by adding video, but that's not changing what we're doing. We're just trying to, that's value that I would want to see, and that's something that I'm adding because I would like it. Also, it's nice to see your faces because audio only was getting hard, and
sure.
Pandemic. It's I gotta say, one of the things that's allowed me to have guests on has been this pandemic. Right, it was so hard to get people with decent audio visual quality before the pandemic on that it was very difficult to do a podcast with someone other than a partner who I did it with on a regular basis. As the pandemic has gone on, it's become easier and easier to be like, oh yeah, just use your microphone and camera that I've seen you use all the time. That'll be fine. Right? Everyone knows how to use headphones now. Everyone knows how to mute themselves. Like we've all been trained on Zoom calls and it's been really useful for having guests on with podcasts because it's made the setup so much easier.
Silver lining.
Yeah, it's been real fun for me, especially in Crown of Swords, to bring on a bunch of people that I've been watching and admiring for a long time, including yourself. So,
Taint. Sorry, I can't help it. I'm a child.
I am curious how they're going to handle that.
They
in
won't.
The show, to be perfectly
They're gonna
honest.
just pick a different word.
They're not going to handle the Dark One's taint
Nope.
in the show. No.
Nope, they're gonna cleanse the taint right out of the script.
Cleanse it.
Oh god, it's so hard not to be just constantly.
But I'm one of the people who didn't know it was a dirty word until after I found the book, so
I'm surprised people didn't know that, but maybe that's just me growing up.
I found the books at a young, innocent age in a very insular, innocent community, so.
Well, and people could have been referring to it as the dirty taint for a long time, or the dirty word taint, whatever. God damn it, it's so hard to differentiate. The body part taint but I wouldn't have registered that because I knew the taint was something that was dirty, tainted from the Dark One. Like, it's entirely possible that I was hearing the word at a younger age, but my brain just recontextualized it into Wheel of Time, not dirty word, despite being a dirty word.
Words are funny. So next I've got Rand having some flashback PTSD kind of stuff and scaring Sulin. Like when he comes back into himself in response to what she's saying, she like steps back and is like, whoa, hello.
I think that's something other than PTSD.
Well, okay.
Those are the first flashes of color. Remember when Rand thinks about Matt and Perrin, he says, especially when he thinks of Matt and Perrin, those colors start to flash. These are the beginning of the visions, right? When he thinks about Matt and Perrin, he sees them in the later books. This is the first time that starts to happen, is in the box.
Yeah, but then what he's thinking about right when she interrupts him is what happened to him in the box. The flashes of color start the paragraph, and then it spirals out into just thinking about the box itself. And then that's when she taps him and is like, hey, what's up? And who would stand eye to eye with a leopard steps back, like, so. And then he feels like he's wearing a mask that's someone else's face. Like, I don't think he's really noticing that the flickers mean anything. They're just reminding him of what happened in the chest, which is more of a PTSD thing.
Jordan likes to introduce these things very early on and not tell you what they are, and then make them more and more and more intense until they slap you in the face, like the channeling sickness.
Right, and because these come in with a bunch of other actual hallucinations, right? Like it's like the dice in Matt's head, right? It takes him a long time to sort out imagination from what's really happening.
Right, because a lot of times he's imagining dice, and then he hears dice, and then it's like the dice are actually rattling.
And there's multiple sets of dice, and he didn't know that until
right.
the pace changes.
How are they going to do that in the show?
Drums, I don't know.
So I think it'd be corny. If
Actual dice in a cup.
That's late enough. Some of the Taviran powers, I wouldn't mind seeing some of the Taviran powers cut, to be perfectly honest, so it's a little more natural. Yeah, because like in a book, it's sort of like, oh, that's cool, but let's make Taviran powers a little less OP.
Yeah, you could just have Matt have a good intuition for
armory.
lucky situations and just talk about how he gets a certain prickle on his neck, and then just allow that to be in the background.
Maybe we just Spidey sense it.
Exactly. It's just Matt.
He gets a prickle, and then you slow motion as he turns over to like someone pulling out the sword. And
yeah,
it's like,
do it once or twice
Spidey
and
sense
establish
it.
the mechanism, and then.
Well, the dice is, to me, it's just a mechanism for Robert Jordan to create some. Like, if you notice how many times a chapter ends with, and then the dice stopped rolling, right? Like,
it is a bit of a cheap shot in that way. Yeah,
it's literally just a way to say, hey, something really big is about to happen in the next chapter.
Yeah.
Like, I think that can go away for the show. I think the dice rolling can. Now, his luck, I think you can show his luck in some pretty crazy ways.
Yeah.
Even with dice
those
rolling.
Are some cool scenes. Yes, just with dice roll. You establish it with the dice rolling, and then you start to you realize it's applying to other real world scenarios, and then that gives him some of that lucky plot armor stuff. Like, I like having the luck. Like, I'm not against the luck, but the dice rolling in his head,
I agree. That should be eliminated.
I think it's great in the book. I wouldn't take it out of the book, but putting it on screen doesn't work.
Okay, here's a tangent. You like tangents. How do you, Seth, you are in charge of the Wheel of Time TV show. How do you adapt to Louis Theron's voice?
I immediately go to Farscape.
I haven't seen Farscape, so...
Oh, okay. So, Farscape was produced by Jim Henson, and the main character has Harvey in his head, which is a neural implant, which is a copy of his archenemy. There's an actor who plays the voice in his head, and that actor can interact with him in several ways. Either a voice he can hear, just as and you just do a voiceover. That actor sitting on set, interacting with him, but nobody else can see that actor. Or pulling him into a headspace where they're just both standing around talking to each other in some sort of, alternate headspace where they can just hang out and talk and chat and argue and yell at each other and that sort of thing.
I like all of those. Because my initial vision was sort of like a beautiful mind. He sees Louis Theron running around. Nobody else sees him. Mm-hmm. To give it sort of a visual, so it's not this cheesy voiceover.
But I think different situations can work in different contexts, right? Like,
true. Very true.
Here, where they're arguing with each other and going into box mode, you put them in a big room that kind of resembles a box.
Right, yeah.
If you look intensely enough, and it lets dark at the corners and make it very... And no time passes outside of it, And then... Or, in the beginning, all you hear is wait, what was that voice? Did you hear that? The sort of whispers from LTT?
And then sometimes LTT's walking around the room commenting on what's happening, and nobody except Rand can see him.
Right. Standing behind the Ashman going, kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him,
Yeah, no, that's definitely always how I've imagined that they're going to have to do it, is with him showing up in whatever way he's showing up to Rand, right? Like, and kind of giving different ways.
He'll be like the guy in, what's that show? Quantum Leap. That only
Ziggy and Ziggy was the computer. I can't remember the guy's name. Yeah, he always had the cigar. Yeah, totally, exactly that sort of thing. Like, you're gonna have to do
and
that.
And have him be like really incongruous sometimes. Like dressed really, really nicely in a really grungy scene, and like that really out of place, bizarreness.
Battlestar did that a little bit with head Balthazar and Head 6.
Yeah, definitely Battlestar Galactica did that too. No, I like that I like that move in storytelling. It gives you so many options to just like break the normal rules of human interaction.
And that's who I think Steve is. I think Steve is the actor they picked to be.
I could totally see that.
LTT.
He looks like an old man that killed his whole family and is dealing with that after 3,000 years of...
Interesting.
I mean, not old, but like older, not significantly older than Yosha.
Look, there's something to be said that the Logain scenes. I don't know if you guys saw the leaked scripts that they had about.
I'm avoiding those. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, so there's this part, and I'm not going to spoil what it is, but there's a script that basically has somebody reading the part of a voice in the head. And people that are attributing it, people are just guessing. They're assuming it's Logain. What if it's not? What if that is Lews Therin? What if and they have cast Steve as Lews Therin? I mean, that's possible. Steve could be Lews Therin.
I mean, that was my assumption when I saw it without any information is, oh, well, of course they've cast Lews Therin and they don't want to call him that, so they just make up a guy name for him and call it Steve. And then looking at the actor, I was like, yeah, he could be a Lews Therin. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much my thought process too. Like, that works.
Possibility.
This is not a little boy or something. Like, okay.
I'm trying to think, who would they not want to announce? A Forsaken?
Yeah, we haven't had one of them.
It's true.
Basically, some Age of the Legends character. Those are the only other character. And so Age of the Legends character, Forsaken.
Or LTT.
Or LTT. Now, Ishamael, I think, might be the more likely one, but why wouldn't they just call him Ishamael? Like, we know that he's going to be in it, right? Like,
maybe they're just trying to preempt everyone who's going to mispronounce it as Ishmael. They're just like, we're not going to bring this name out until we actually have an actor delivering the line. We don't want to just give the word.
Hey, there's a chance we don't get any Forsaken at all.
They're just like what they get talked about, but we don't actually see them. That would make them very scary.
Because you could take out all of the dream sequences and pretty much eliminate Bialsamon from season 1.
Yeah, Trollocs and Fades are scary enough to get going, for sure. The Black Wind, I mean, come on.
I do really like the dream stuff, though. Like, I really think that's an important part of the magicalness of the first book, is, like, putting Rand in this 4-dimensional, non-geometric world and make him navigate around. And that, like, prepares you for more Teleron-Riyadh stuff later.
I normally don't like it in the books.
Oh, I love it.
I feel like it would translate so well on TV.
It really helps you see how the three boys are connected. And yeah, like visually, that would work really well. Visually,
I want them to nail the world. Okay, now we're getting way off topic, but I want them to nail the world of dreams, because to me, I think that'll be so interesting to see them do like Inception style, like Doctor Strange making stuff move and shit.
Yeah,
I think
holodeck, but with way better CGI. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like that's kind of where if the show looks like Game of Thrones, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Yeah.
They've got a bigger budget.
Both the fact that this is a world that was modern and has decayed from that, which means we need some real wonders that are left over. And we've got some real non-Euclidean spaces that our characters get to occupy. Taking those two things, like let's... Euclidean, you know what I mean, like whatever. They non-standard universes, and so like you need CGI to represent those, and that's one of the things. Like Doctor Strange was so powerful, like some of those other modern superhero type storytelling have done so well, is put you in this other world place, and it's why this story is no longer absurd to do.
Right, the technology's finally caught up to what RJ has given us to work with.
Well, I'm not worried about special effects. If you've seen the studio, any of the work from the studio they hired to do the special effects, I'm not even the slightest bit worried about it. So not even a little bit.
That's probably the number one thing I'm excited to see, other than actors in character, is the CGI.
I want to see building. I see this lumps into CGI, but I want to see Camelin. I want to see the White Tower. I want to see White Bridge. I want to see those big structures that you're talking about. I want to see it real, not just an artist's conception of it. I want a canon. That's what it looks like.
Well, and that's sort of what, I guess, that's part of the CGI for me, because that's part of building the background, building that, we can see these sets and it's like, oh, it's Yasha in front of a wall with some archery stuff set up. And we're like, okay, but what's not there is everything else they're going to put into that scene, and that's what I'm excited to see from a visual point of view, and really help me communicate that with people who haven't read the books as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say, like, tangent on a tangent on a tangent. I cannot wait to talk to my parents about these books and be like, remember in episode 3 you saw the White Tower? Yeah, like that's you know, like I'm so excited to talk to non-readers about these books. By
going to be making YouTube videos a hell of a lot easier to make. My YouTube videos are going to get better when I have real stuff to put in.
When you actually have like you know, produce all your own visuals. Yeah, I've thought about that as well, where I'm like, oh man, cutting, it's got to be so hard for these YouTubers. When I look at what like Game of Thrones folks doing, they're cutting together all of this, you know, good art and show clips, and like, and occasionally they put their talking head in, but so rarely. Like that's, whereas I look at YouTube videos and it's like, this is my forehead. Watch it while I talk. You know?
Hey, what are you trying to say?
I am, you know what? Like, this is pot calling the kettle black as we.
You know that, I mean, I'm making, there aren't maps of most of the locations. That's why I've been making maps of locations that we don't have them for. Anyways, yeah, I mean, all that'll get easier when we have actual show clips.
Yeah, it'll be nice to have $1 million R&D budget for, you know,
for my YouTube channel.
For your YouTube channel, basically, right? Like, because you're going to be able to take all that material that's been used to produce for the TV show. So yeah, I'm totally agree with you. We're working on visuals for Broken Earth spoilers, which is, have you read Broken Earth? The series?
No, I haven't.
I gotta say, N.K. Jemisin is one of the only authors that can take me away from Jordan.
Exactly. When you were saying earlier how Jordan broke you, we were both nodding, and I meant to cut in and say,
because we were both thinking about Jefferson.
Except that. Yeah, we both thought that at the same time. So she has written a modern world that is as consuming, if shorter, but still as consuming as something that I think Jordan wrote. And she absolutely ruined Sanderson for me. Absolutely ruined him for me.
I'm not a fan of Sanderson's writing style. I think he's a great author. So it's like, who am I to criticize? I'm not. But it's not. He writes to me too cinematically. Like, I feel like he's right. Everything is too polished.
Agreed. Strong agree.
Where I sort of like the fact that characters can kind of do their own thing. Like, Robert Jordan to me is a perfect middle ground between George R.R. Martin and Sanderson, because he pulls elements from both styles. You know, George R.R. Martin writes these meandering like, he just takes a character and says, what would they do? And that's how he gets so far off in his story where it's everywhere. Sanderson plots every single point, and then it's like, boom, it's like connecting dots to get some. And Jordan is like a mishmash of both of them, because we do meander a little bit, but he always has these bullet points that he brings the characters back to.
Yeah.
And because Jordan was first, what I'd say is both Martin and Sanderson are pale imitations of what he was
they're taking parts that they liked and running with that specific thing.
And parts that they are good at and running with that. And like, don't get me wrong, I love Sanderson's action scenes, but you know, there's something about sword forms and the freedom that gives me to imagine what's going on that I never get from Brandon Sanderson's beat by beat description of exactly how the sword is swinging. And I can read Sanderson's description of a battle at once and know exactly how it went. I can go back and read Jordan's description and again see it from 5 different perspectives. And so it's not that I don't love what Sanderson writes, but the rereadability that Jordan creates is not there in Sanderson. I read his stuff once and I get to the end of it. You know, he has great twists, and I love a second reread because then I know the twists.
Right.
But after that, there's nothing really to discover. Whereas I'm still rereading Wheel of Time.
And you know what, to defend him, it's easy to have that when you've got 15 books worth of material to kind of pour through.
Very fair.
Totally. You know? On my counterpoint is, at this point, Sanderson's published a lot more than 15 books.
True, but not in the same world, kind of.
Yeah,
I guess the Cosmere.
Again, inspired by Jordan.
Inspired by Jordan. Yeah.
Well, he says he is too. I mean,
absolutely.
I like Robert, and I'm happy Sanderson finished the books.
Yes.
I think he did as good of a job as I think anybody could have done trying to finish those books in the time frame that he did it. Totally get that. So
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?